without Ms. Hall tonight. Is that correct? All right. So you're running the show. All right. All right. Well, it is showtime. So I'm going to say that tonight we are
This
calling.
conference will now be recorded.
There we go. All right. So we are, at this time, we will call to order the 27th September 2022 King George County Planning Commission special meeting for our zoning and planning ordinance updates. For the record, we do have a quorum. Very small quorum, but we do have a quorum. At this time, if you could, I'd ask that anybody who can please stand and recite with us the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mr. Williams, would you lead us in invocation, please?
All right. Heavenly Father, we thank you, dear Lord, for allowing us to gather in this place one more time, dear Lord. We thank you for the grace and mercy you've granted us today. Dear Lord, we ask that you give us clear hearts and minds as we go about the county's businesses, dear Lord, and doing what is best for the people. We can ask that you protect us from any hurt, harm, and danger, both seen and unseen. These and other blessings we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you all. All right. The next item on our agenda is the public comment period of the evening. And so at this point, we're going to open up the floor for public comment. And if you would, please approach the podium, state your name and address, and limit your comments to 3 minutes. And at this point, we'll open the floor for comments and come in any order you like.
Good evening. My name's Tom Brooks. I've been a citizen of King George County for 18 years. And I'd like to offer some comments on the subject of inoperable vehicles. King George currently has an ordinance on that says it shall be unlawful for any person, firm, or corporation to keep on any property zoned for residential, commercial, agricultural purposes more than one vehicle, trailer, or semi-trailer which is inoperable. I'm comfortable with that personally. I think that's just fine. However, under exceptions, there is an exception that says the provisions of this ordinance shall not apply to any inoperable vehicle within a fully enclosed building or structure or otherwise shielded or screened from view. And the county's interpreted that as a car cover or tarp represents screening from view, as opposed to having it in a completely enclosed structure. Concerns with inoperable vehicles being out on the property, there's a pretty good definition by Fairfax County where they say it represents a fire hazard, a hindrance to fighting fires, creates unsanitary harborage for rodents and insects. Vehicle wiring actually has got a soy-based component, so mice and rabbits will disable your vehicle if you're not careful. And it can be a health and safety hazard as far as leaking fluids, leaking fuels, and so forth on the ground. And so I would like to suggest that the county consider changing the ordinance to say that an inoperable vehicle, more than one, would have to be stored in a building and completely shielded, as opposed to simply a car cover.
Thank you, Mr. Brooks.
Hello, Planning Commission. My name is Brian Harkless, 6362 Berry Plains Landing in King George. I've been here for about 10 years, so thank you for letting me show up for the first time here today. I'm here to echo what Mr. Brooks has said about the car covers. My concerns are a little different than his. When we have those car covers being allowed, it really creates kind of an unsafe environment. There's no restriction on the access, right? So my concern is that kids can get in and play in those cars. They can get, it's just a real danger and a hazard in that way. And also, by not completely shielding and then enclosing them, it creates an unsightly view, and it just seems to be a real danger as our county gets more urban and we get more investment in the county, that we're going to have these little mini junkyards sprouting up. Well, they're not sprouting up, they're here all throughout our county, and it just is a danger to property value growth and again to the safety of people in and around the area. So those are my two concerns. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. All right. Anybody next?
Good evening. My name is John Edgar. I live at 4250 Stafford Lane. I've been there for 16 years. May I approach and give you a handout?
Sure. Thank you.
So I'm here tonight to ask the board to approve a change to the ordinance to allow for commercial wineries. Currently, I'm an amateur winemaker and I'm allowed to make up to 200 gallons of wine per year for personal use, since my wife and I both reside in the same house. As a commercial winery, I would not be required to grow my own grapes, which would open me up to be able to source not just grapes from Virginia, but also from other regions around the world. Um, it would also give me the ability to sell the wine, to have a tasting area for people. And I think this would actually bring in a new wine tasting experience to the county. Becoming part of the local wine trail could also increase tourism. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else?
Hi, Debbie Fairfax, 623 Kings Highway. Over the last several weeks, I've listened and I understand the need for revenue generating interests in the county. I advocate for a win-win-win situation, and you hold the key. It's through proper ordinances. You can set this county up for success and allow for the peaceful coexistence of industry and citizens living nearby. For now, we need to move data centers, solar farms, and battery storage out of by right use in industrial and allow them by special exception. Please hear me out. I'm not saying ban them. I'm saying give the county more control. So as Jeffrey Stonehill said at the last board meeting, we can do things right from the beginning rather than try to fix a situation later. These are new industries to our county, and we don't have experience with them or their impacts. Other localities which sought out data centers are now realizing that they need to change their ordinances to better regulate them, including Loudoun, Prince William, Groton, Connecticut, who has set a one-year moratorium while updating their regs, and Chandler, Arizona, to name just a few. And noise is one of the main reasons. This change to by special exception will not keep industry away. We don't allow power plants by right in industrial, and we had one for years, and we just had someone approach the board on August 16th wanting to establish a power generating facility, data centers, and a manufacturing facility. I'm asking specifically for someone to make a motion tonight to consider forwarding this specific request to the board, someone to second it, just so discussion can be had and where the staff can be asked to weigh in on this. If an applicant had industrial zoned property and wanted to put data centers on it, the industry would have to meet the existing ordinances for data centers, of which there are only 4. The site plan would have to meet current community design standards, which aren't written with data centers in mind. Then the only way this would go before the board would be if the corporation asked for any special exemptions, which is doubtful because our ordinances aren't very robust. There would be no planning commission input, no public comment, and potentially no board approval. Do you see why someone would want property zoned industrial? An industry could even buy property already zoned industrial from another company. This is a finger in the dike moment. Second, as part of the process, we must have strong ordinances specifically for data centers. I see the Berkeley Group has grouped the community design standards together for ease of facilitation, but I think data centers need to have greater specificity for setbacks, buffers, and noise. I've only just noticed that they were in the agenda packet from the 26th of July, so I didn't realize they were part of the agenda, so I haven't fully examined them. but I noticed that the solar spells out in detail setbacks and buffers and things specific. I'd like to request the same for data centers. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
I'm Todd Fairfax. I live at 623 Kings Highway. Mr. Chairman and Planning Commissioners, I'd also like to comment on data centers tonight. In Article 821 that will be up for discussion tonight in the drafted text, light is covered in detail. Light is covered in detail, and that's very good. Noise also needs to be considered in the same way. Data facilities are somewhat unique among industrial uses, maybe not exactly, but mostly unique in that they operate 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, no stopping. And they will be near people's residences. And they need to not be seen nor heard from any neighboring property, road, or use. In Chandler, Arizona, they have found homes living up to a half a mile away are negatively impacted by the constant noise. A noise like this, imagine a blender on high speed all day, all night in your yard or in your house. That's what it sounds like. We need to ensure that the noise does not adversely impact uses on adjacent land by setting both decibel levels and frequency ranges to cover ranges that are heard by humans as well as livestock and animals and pets and the rest. The majority of the noise comes from the fans that data centers use to exchange the enormous amount of heat that they produce inside to the outside. Fans can be designed to be very, very silent if somebody spends enough money. And I think you all would agree that data center operators have significant capital to work with to achieve this if we impose that upon them for the sake of our community. Warrenton, for example, requires data center generators to be equipped with mufflers. I know setbacks are on the conversation tonight, setbacks and buffers. We've talked about the audible, but perhaps we need to look at minimum 300-foot setbacks that includes a minimum of a 200-foot vegetative buffer specifically for data centers. And perhaps we need to compel those to be not more than 30% deciduous trees because they lose their leaves half of the year and they don't provide the visual buffer and perhaps some of the sound mitigation, and not less than 70% conifer trees, and specify that they be planted at 8-foot height. If we wait until trees are mature, we're looking at 30 years perhaps. That's not terribly useful. Perhaps include low-growing shrubs and bushes for the understory. This maintains the rural character of the county consistent with the the comprehensive plan and the residents' strong desires. Also, we don't define public water system that we use in 4.17 in our current ordinance. We need to specify that public water system used for data centers does not come from aquifers. It needs to not come from wells, or we will drain our aquifers. These data centers consume tens of thousands of gallons of water. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Fairfax.
Hi, my name is Julie Edgar. I live at 4250 Stafford Lane, King George. I've been here for 16 years as well. Don is my husband. I just want to piggyback on his change to the ordinance. I'd like to find out if we can get a waiver while the ordinance is being changed so I can actually get the stuff out of my house, can start looking for commercial property, and actually start the business and get permits and whatnot. So, thank you.
Thank you. Righty, any other comments this evening? If not, we will close the public comment period. Next item on the agenda is approval of the minutes, of which we have none tonight because it's our special meeting. Next item on the agenda is Community Planning Liaison Officer, Naval Sport Facility, South Potomac. And at this time, I'll turn the floor over to Mr. Hastings, if he's on the line.
I am. Thank you. No
How
update
you doing?
tonight.
Let me go back. Mr. Dines, was there anybody on the line on the there anybody else that wanted to speak public that was maybe tuning in? Okay. Okay. Thank you. Sorry, put the cart before the horse. Mr. Hastings, the floor is yours. Please, if you've got anything to report, the floor is yours.
Thank you. No updates tonight.
All right. Thank you for participating. Next item, plan review. We have none this evening. Public hearings, we have none. And then it brings us to our old business, the zoning and subdivision ordinance updates from the Berkeley group. How are y'all doing? I'm sorry I didn't say hello. I feel rude. How's everybody?
That's okay. Thanks for having us again.
Yeah, sure thing.
Alrighty, this is going to be another long one, gentlemen, so we'll go ahead and dive right in. You should have everything in front of you there. Just a note to you all as you continue to look through this after this evening into next month. Just take a look at those editor's notes. This article specifically had a lot of nuanced changes that you may just want to compare to the old ordinance. And the editor's notes should walk you through that for anything that you continue to review after tonight. So tonight we're going to do Article 8, which is the community design standards. And as you're aware, all of a zoning ordinance is public health, safety, welfare, those sorts of things. But this article focuses on the aesthetics of that mostly, and how to get something that's safe but also beautiful. So we're about towards the end of the drafting. After this, we'll have 2 more work sessions together, and then we're in the final stages of the project. So our little roadmap hasn't changed here, but we've made a lot of progress. The only thing you'll see here that remains after tonight will be the subdivision article, and then we will look at everything all as one big package. So what this article includes are 8 different divisions. We have visibility clearance, which is something that's carried over from your existing ordinance. That's essentially just saying that nothing can block sight lines at an intersection. We have lighting. You will have your standard purpose and intent, applicability, the standards that they have, and some provisions for modification. Your 3rd division is going to be landscaping and screening, more of the same, purpose and intent, applicability, landscape plan requirements, some standards for buffers, screenings and enclosures, landscaping for parking lots, and once again, modification language. Next up, you will have walls and fences, purpose, applicability, location, height, material, and maintenance standards are provided here. Next up, you will have parking and loading, which will include some general standards that apply overall, provisions for joint or shared use of parking for different uses, reduction, parking design standards, the parking schedule, so how many parking spaces per use. We have included some bicycle parking that we will go over, and then of course your loading provisions. The next division is signs. Again, purpose and intent. We have some administration, which talks about getting a sign permit, what signs are prohibited, what is exempt, how to measure a sign, and general standards that apply to them all. We have some special sign standards, a changeable sign, for instance. We will dive into that. And then we have permitted signs by district, saying what types of signs are allowed, the height that they are allowed to be, square footage. This is a change from the existing ordinance, so we will go over that. I saw some eyes, I saw some eyebrows go up. And then we have some language about non-conforming signs, and then of course maintenance and enforcement. Second to last, we have open space, which is a new division. There is some existing language in the subdivision ordinance that talks about open space for subdivisions of a certain size. This is a little more broad. It applies to a few more developments throughout the county. So this is new. We'll go over this in detail. You'll have purpose and intent as always, applicability, when this will apply. We have the amount of open space that's required, what counts as open space, what does not count as open space, etc. And then lastly, also a new division that we have crafted for you all is utilities. This is essentially about private wells and septics, just to address some of those issues that you've been telling us about over the course of the last year and a half. So with that, we will get right to it. And what we'll do, as with every night, I'll stop at each division. So after we get through lighting, I'll take a beat, we can talk about it, ask any questions you have. But I will say that reading you all over the last year and a half or so, I think that signage, probably parking, and then the open space may be the big ones that we want to get to at the very least. So just keep that in mind as we work through this stuff. All right, so the roadway for drafting this article, it was based on locality precedents, so looking at some neighboring localities, making sure that you're both comparable and competitive with those regulations. We talked about that early in the beginning, being something that is maybe putting you in a position to draw more business here and to keep yourselves aligned with your neighbors. We've also included some things that are a best practice. Bicycle parking is a good, easy one. We have reorganized some of your existing content. There were a lot of these standards for the HCOD, but mostly only the HCOD and a little bit in mixed use. So we've reorganized that to apply broadly. And then, of course, based on public engagement and what we've heard from staff and you all thus far. So first up is lighting. So this is going to apply to all commercial, industrial, planned development, which reminder that's the mixed use and the resort community districts, and R3 districts. And why we've included R3 here is apartment buildings, multifamily developments, those sorts of things. Any non-residential use in a residential district, so a school, a church that's in a residential district. I do want to note here the ag uses are exempt. Exceptions to lighting, exemptions I should say, are for roadways, single and two-family development, so single-family dwellings and duplexes, anything that's state, federally, or locally owned, anything that's required by the building code, FAA regulations, those sorts of things. Construction, emergency, holiday, performance, or festival lighting. These are the things that are temporary. They're usually up for 45 days or less. Security lighting, architectural lighting that's less than 40 watts. This could just be a little light on the side of a doorway to make it look a little pretty, a little bit old-fashioned. Outdoor athletic fields, and repair and replacement of existing bulbs or lights. So the standards here, you'll see it in section 823. That's where those begin. We have hours of illumination, which if they're abutting residential, we have it that it should be cut off within 1 hour of closing, and the lights are to remain off until 1 hour before opening. This focuses on full cutoff lights, dark sky compliant. We have some examples here to the right to show you what full cutoff would mean. It's essentially the lighting, the way it's designed is the light goes down instead of going out. Pole-mounted lights are not to exceed a height of 30 feet in industrial districts and 20 feet in commercial, planned development, and those other commercial uses that would be in non-commercial districts. Next up, still in the standard section, we have light color and illumination. This is essentially saying how warm or cold and thus how bright a light will be. We have it at a 3000 Kelvin color temperature or less. If you can see it on the right-hand side there, bear in mind, sunlight will be different on different days, but the 3000 mark is the second to bottom light bulb on the right-hand side, just to give you an idea of what that looks like. We also have a new provision in here that came from neighboring localities, but also this is something that was already included in the HCOD regulations, that the maximum brightness, if you will, is 0.5 foot candles if it's abutting an agricultural or residential district, a residence, or a public right-of-way. And if anyone's unfamiliar with a foot candle, it's just the measurement for, so 1 foot candle is 1 square foot of light. It kind of will show you at the top here. It's a little nuanced. I'm not a scientist, but. Any questions so far on lighting?
Just one. As I was reading this, under B,
823.
exemptions, there's one that just caught me by surprise, the lighting of flags. particularly the very final comment, and other non-commercial flags expressing constitutionally protected speech.
I'm getting there.
Not B10,
B10.
the very end of that statement.
Let's see.
I'm just curious where it came from, what the intent is.
This is something that we typically include in all of our ordinances. You'll see it in most cases. This is just saying that if you have a sign, maybe you have the state flag of Virginia, or you have an army flag, or a collegiate flag, or any other sign that would be protected by freedom of speech. If you have it on your house, you can have a little small light. Many people have it in their yards. That's what that would include.
A lot of politics going on at the moment. I assume all that's covered, but is this to give the county legal protection? Is that the intent?
For this one,
Yeah.
this would be for anyone that has a flag, not so much just the planning commission or the board, but this is just to give a little bit of freeway in displaying your own flag.
Okay. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Anything to add?
I would consider deleting the non-commercial free speech exemption to this.
Anybody else agree or disagree?
I had that thought. My only concern is from a liability perspective. I wouldn't want to see us put something in here that could cause somebody to challenge our ordinances based on that.
I
So is this, I'm just asking, is this something that we see? I mean, is it fairly rote language that y'all put in, or that most localities include?
Most recently, right?
Most localities included, and I mean, there's not to my knowledge any court cases currently that addresses the nuance that you're talking about, the difference that you're talking about, but I could see it going that route, and if you want to take it out, I would suggest having legal counsel review
Yeah,
that just to make sure.
I'm thinking of the one on 95, I guess it's in Stafford County, that's caused a bit of a brouhaha lately. Right. Yeah.
Mr. DeCorda, please make sure you're speaking into your microphone.
Political, religious, and commercial versus non-commercial becomes a fine line when you talk about free speech.
Let's
refer to. I would.
I was gonna say, can we just, Lewis, can we take this for action that council will review? Thank you.
Your question would be whether it'd be okay just to remove that last part about expressing constitutionally protected speech?
I don't know that we necessarily want to say remove it, but I think we want to get a legal opinion on, does that create a liability for the county? Is that accurate?
Does removing it
or leaving it? I mean, does it?
Okay.
I mean, Mr. Kendrick, what would you?
Yeah, I think I would appreciate, legal counsel advice on that. I'm not trying to suggest that I want to put the county at any kind of, risk, but I also don't want to encourage divisiveness and it doesn't even have to be political. I mean, people, the way this reads to me is, if you want to put a statement on a flag and fly it and light it 24 hours a day, you could. And
yeah,
a giant cross of a Star of David, other symbology. that's bright and it's lit up. And I mean, I'm not trying to prohibit, I mean, to restrict that speech, but I think illuminating it is enabling it or allowing a new belief, is
What people put on their private property during the daytime, fine, It's the idea of illuminating it in the middle of the night that's bothering me a little bit.
Okay.
So yeah,
Lewis,
if we
you
could
have that
get
right. Okay.
council's advice on that one.
I think Lewis is going to get that in the works. All right. Any other things before we move on to landscaping and screening?
I had one on section 8-2-3. Section F, illumination levels, 0.5 foot candles at the right of way. Does VDOT have its own rule on that we could be in conflict with?
What language is in here?
VDOT does have rules about signage in the right of way. But I believe we do have some language in here related to VDOT.
I'm not talking about signage, I'm talking about illumination levels. Section F on page 4.
No, he's right here.
Yeah, but would this cover that?
So we do have under the exemptions 8-2-2, number 1, lighting within a public right of way or easement used primarily for illuminating a right of way. That may help in some instances. I don't think the item F that you are referring to is going to conflict with VDOT. I mean, it may be stricter than VDOT, and what the ordinance is going to say is whatever is more strict will prevail. And so if VDOT were to be more strict than the 0.5 foot candles, then they have to comply with what VDOT says. That answer?
Yes, thank you.
And that language about the more strict regulations, that should be way back Article 1, maybe, or 2.
My main concern was, why are we regulating something that we can't regulate, that
Right,
it's actually the purview of VDOT? That's really the gist of my
Okay.
question.
All right. Any other questions about lighting? Okay. All right. So next up we have landscaping and screening, which is your Division 2. And I'll start off here by saying that further in this division in section 838, this is going to allow the administrator to waive these standards through a waiver process. She'll be able to modify them in the event that a certain development comes in and maybe these aren't quite necessary. But as we sort of explained at the beginning of the process, it's hard to get every scenario covered in the ordinance, which is where we come up with those modifications. So I just want to point that out before we get too far into this. There is some language in there that will grant the administrator the right to waive some of these things. All right, first up, we have applicability. So these new landscaping and screening standards are going to apply to new construction, development, or redevelopment in all districts for uses that require a site plan, a special exception, or a zoning permit. Exemptions are going to include those agricultural uses that are defined in the use matrix, as well as single and two-family dwellings. Moving on to general standards, healthy trees and shrubs are to be preserved as best as possible. Those can be credited towards the requirements of this ordinance. Required landscaping is to be installed prior to the issuance of a certificate of occupancy. For buffers of more than 20 trees, variety is required to give it a bit of a more organic and natural look. That being said, no more than 30% of landscaping can be more than one species for the same reason. This is just to add a little bit of a natural look to the landscaping that's required, particularly when it's coming in as a buffer between uses. Other standards include maintenance, nursery grown plants, native plants to King George and the region, those sorts of things. Moving on to transitional buffers. So this is a bit of a new idea for you in the ordinance. The existing ordinance has some language that requires buffers between industrial districts if they're abutting residential or ag. This is expanding it to include commercial districts as well as R3, just because those are going to eventually see some more multifamily development, some bigger developments, and then of course the HCOD itself. So what this chart is telling you, the way that this will be read, is you will start at the yellow column and you'll say, okay, the application is for something in C1. So you'll say what districts are abutting the lot of the application. If it's abutting an R1 district, it would be a type B buffer. If on another side it's abutting another C1 district, there would be no buffer. Any questions on how to read this chart or how to make sense of that? Okay, so what we're suggesting here is that if new development is coming in to the ag districts, R1 or R2, essentially, accepting the HCOD, that there would be no buffers. If someone buys a house or a residential lot next to a commercial district and they build a home, that's more or less their choice versus the inverse of that. Commercial district is empty, it's next to a home, someone buys it, so then that would require a buffer. This would again be required for all development within the HCOD. That would be a type B buffer. We will get into that at the next slide, what that would mean. Rezonings, and then new development except the single and two family dwellings or between uses, buildings, or lots that are developed together or under common ownership. We also have some exemptions that are listed in this table. Again, ag to ag, R1 to R1, those sorts of things.
Stephanie,
All right. Oh, sure.
I'm sorry, one
It's
thing.
okay.
The one piece that you mentioned about the administrator to be able to waive those, was just wondering the logic behind that one?
It's just so sort of in the same instances where I want to say we put some language at the beginning of Article 7 for the use standards. Again, we try our best to get as close to a catch-all scenario as we can for these regulations, but there may be something that comes in that maybe doesn't need a type B, even though we have it designated here. Or maybe they have a lot of existing vegetation and they have this new incredible fence they want to use. We have other measures built in for alternative buffers. So we have things built in here so that the first line of defense isn't a waiver from the administrator, but we're just putting that in there just because King George County is so big. And I think it's at the cusp of a lot of development. And again, you won't be able to tailor this to catch every scenario. So you just want to give yourself a little back pocket option.
So, yeah, and I just wanted to kind of bring it back to the commissioners for a second. If you recall, we had a development, a fast food restaurant that came in Dower, and it was on a uniquely sized piece of land. We waived some of the landscaping requirements for that, but that came before us, and we kind of bantered it about for a good while. I mean, I guess, so in this case, if I'm reading correctly, then those exemptions wouldn't come before the planning commission in that case. It would be made within the planning office.
It would, but if it's something that you all would prefer to have come before you, I can't remember off the top of my head, but there's something we talked about a few months back that you all see. I can't remember what it is. Someone's shaking their head, but I can't remember. But we could, Rebecca.
And I'll say if it was something that it was part of like a rezoning, say they're rezoning the piece of property and they're saying, hey, this is a unique situation, that would be a case where you're going to be having public hearing and it would be part of the application where they're showing you the site plan and design. So in those instances, yes, you would be part of that decision. This is if it's already commercial property, it's a by right use, this would go through the administrator.
Mr. Parker, does your question have anything to do with what guidance there is for the administrator to make those judgments?
Well, no, I'm just thinking from the standpoint of, I know y'all get pressure just in general for a lot of stuff that comes through from applicants. And I'm just thinking if this is one thing that if the planning office could say, well, that's up to the planning commission, and we could objectively and judiciously mitigate things that might otherwise be an issue for y'all, right? And so, I mean, but I want to figure out if it's something that y'all want to, as the planning commissioners, is this something y'all want to see when it comes through?
So if you want, the modifications are in section 8-3-8.
Uh-huh.
And it says that it's to have the same or similar screening impact and intensity variation as what is required. It's that it could be using existing trees that have the same, intent instead of planting trees. So it's there to help preserve existing stuff instead of having someone pull things out and put new stuff in. It also talks about that maybe they're varying the number or the species mixture or things like that. So it's a narrow window, and they are still required to show that they are meeting basically the requirements in a different way, if you will.
So, Mr. Chairman, my concern would be is I don't want us to sort of get too deep into the planning office's day-to-day business.
Right.
And we're going to see anything that's not by right, we would see, correct? If so, then that would, if I understand this, that would be up to us to include that as part of our review to approve a not by right. Am I offline here? Am I misunderstanding anything?
No.
So for the sake of not trying to do their job, which I don't think any of us really want to, I think this sounds like a reasonable compromise between the two.
So there would be, in any case, there would be a bar that they would have to meet, correct? Which,
Yes, so the language in 838 is basically saying that even if, let's say, this is such a surface level example, but just to make it simple, let's say that they come to you and they say, hey, I'm putting in this Burger King, and I'm back up against an ag district, but there's a whole row of evergreens or of pines that are already there, but it's more than that 30% variety that we have included in here. That would be something that could be modified because the intensity of the screen itself is still being met.
Okay.
So the language that's in the 838 is basically saying this isn't being lowered. You still have to meet the minimums, but maybe just in, as Rebecca said, in a different way. But it would never be lower than what's required.
Richard, Lewis, y'all okay with that?
I mean, it's up to you. That is kind of what our current ordinance says now, that existing vegetation can be used as long as it meets or exceeds the screening requirements. But I do have a question, and that's for the that layout and design standards. But then under modifications and or reductions to transitional buffers, it doesn't quite have those strict standards. It just says as deemed appropriate when uses are in kind with adjacent uses. Is there a way to expand a little more on
What
that?
we maybe could do actually is just take it out where it talks about it specifically in the transitional buffers and the landscape plan, and just have it as a whole section that applies to the entire division. So basically keep 838, which would apply to the whole division, and it would be a catch-all.
I think the issue is your answer to Mr. Parker's question was modifications, but the way it's written, it says modifications and or reductions. So it's a little more,
We can take out that nuanced word of
the word
reduction.
reduction, I
We
think,
can-
would help.
Sure, we can take that out.
Word reductions.
Modifications would still cover the premise, so we could take reductions and strike that.
Would that help?
Yeah.
Yeah,
What do y'all think?
I like that.
Okay, anything
Too quiet.
on this?
So, and by removing the word reductions, that removes the possibility that someone may have a lower than standard proposal
Correct.
approved.
Right. So let's just say one more example, and I'll try to keep it simple. Let's say that the requirements require, don't get this number stuck in your head. I should have it memorized by now, but I don't. Let's say we're requiring a 20-foot buffer. And they say, oh, I have 18 feet of existing wooded area. That's enough. This would, if we take out the word reduction, that would prevent, they would still need to provide 2 more feet to meet that 20-foot minimum. Does that make sense?
Or request exception or.
Which,
What worries me, Mr. Chair, is having something happen that is approved by the administrator and results in a matter the public may feel should have had a public hearing before it was done, especially on a larger scale project.
That's a good point.
I mean,
so the perfect example that somebody mentioned earlier is the restaurant that we reviewed a month or 2 ago, where we reduced the requirements, but that came before us. And so we as a body agreed. That wasn't left in the hands of an individual who just said, oh, it's close enough, it's good. Because anytime you cross a line, the next time you cross it farther. So I think by taking out the reduction comment, that means it has to happen the way you're suggesting it. It doesn't quite meet the standard. It's a request for an exemption. It comes before us. We can do what we believe is reasonable, 18, yeah, in a very public way.
William, do you have any thoughts on
I think I have to agree with him in that. I have to agree with him in that it gives us that control, I guess, if you will, for lack of words.
Yeah. But to synopsize, it still provides adequate or as much or more coverage as what's currently in the regulations. Correct for us?
They're a little increased. So what we've proposed is a little more than what's required now.
Okay. Okay.
And I think to Mr. Kendrick's point, I think you either asked this or brought it up. A lot of what you all it'll still come to you, whether it's through a special exception or a rezoning. So you may end up seeing a fair amount of things anyhow, just to put your mind at ease.
If we had to get involved and see every time some current property, business, residence, whatever it is, decided to change something, I just don't, that would be a significant burden on this group that only meets once a month.
That's true.
So I'm happy to leave them. Now, to me, one of my problems in my professional life has been that if I rely upon the individual, I may trust them and believe in their judgment and all that, but people move on and they're replaced by different people who I may or may not know how they would react.
Right.
If you have it down in a standard, an ordinance, there's not that flexibility.
It removes the subjectivity.
But I don't want this body to be reviewing each and everything the planning office does.
Yeah.
So I'm content to draw the line myself at those things that would reduce the standards, which would force them to bring it to us, but just adhering to the standard and modifying how you adhere to it, I'm perfectly content to let the planning staff. Again, I'm back to the point where the current planning staff I have a lot of faith and trust in, who might be sitting there 10 years from now, maybe different attitude. I think one of our roles is also giving them a little bit of cover when they have somebody who might have a little bit of influence in the county trying to pressure them to do something.
Right.
So
That's
if you're changing anything, we've got things in place that require that an exception be requested. That takes it out of their hands and brings it to us. And my years on this body have been that we're strong enough personality wise that we don't hold to too much pressure like
no,
that.
not really.
Not from an individual anyway.
Right.
If we take out the reduction comment that was suggested, I think I'm good with it.
Okay. Good.
Moving on.
All right.
Okay. All right. Next up, we have a little bit more detail on what the location and design standards are. And the next slide, we're going to talk about what plantings are required, the depth, those sorts of things. So let's get through this one quickly. So what we say here is that buffers can be in setbacks. Type A and type B are to be filled completely but dispersed in an organic way. Type C, which is directed towards the industrial districts, this is going to be a minimum of 2 staggered rows. Each row would need to have the minimum required plantings. So type C is clearly the more intense of the 3 buffer types. Development within the buffers is limited to fences and walls, sidewalks, trails, etc. A 10-foot deep landscape strip is required when it's adjacent to a stormwater management facility or best management practice, if it's located next to a residential or commercial district or within a side or rear setback. This provision is a carryover from the existing ordinance, so we've kept that as it's pretty specific to King George. Any questions on this so far before we dive into what the type A, B, and C are?
Very quickly, we've had community feedback and input on matters relating to solar farms, industrial applications, and I don't believe our current ordinance has landscaping standards for industrial. A frequent thing I hear is, total deforestation and replacement by panels. If the controls aren't in this piece, is there another part of the ordinance?
So in the solar standards, I'd have to go back, but I think we limit what can be cut down. We limit what can be cleared. And they also have an increased setback.
I think we limited it. Yeah, we didn't allow it on anything that's already currently forested, correct?
Correct. So basically, at the last work session, the group, I can't remember if you were here, the group decided that what we would add some language that says you can't remove trees to put panels. If there are trees there, you got to leave them, so that there's no superfluous land clearing. Okay, so let's dive in to what these type A, B, and C are. Again, as I mentioned a couple of minutes ago when we were in discussion, overall the landscaping standards have been increased. Not by 50%, it's not a 100% jump or anything, but we have increased them a bit. And as with lighting, this is to keep you comparable with what's happening around you and in some other bigger counties that are seeing some growth. So what we have here is type A, which is what would be required between R3 against any of the ag districts or R1 and R2, would be a minimum width of 15 feet, 2 deciduous or evergreen trees per 100 feet, 1 ornamental or understory tree per 100 feet, and then 6 shrubs per 100 feet. And I will just jump through B and C quickly, and then we can discuss this. So B would be an increase to 30 feet overall. We've doubled the tree count for the evergreen trees, 8 ornamental or understory, and then 10 shrubs. And then type C, which is going to be your most intense, is going to be a 50-foot minimum depth, 8 evergreen or deciduous trees, 10 ornamental or understory, and then 20 shrubs. And I will note here that the HCOD, that is a type B, regardless of the development. If you're on an ag district and you're building a little house there and you're in the HCOD along Route 301 or 3, That would be a type B buffer. I have some little examples just in case anyone doesn't know entirely what an evergreen or maybe an understory or ornamental would be. Any questions about these? Anything we want to talk about here?
So we recently were looking at, I believe it was cluster subdivisions, where we said we wanted a setback of a lot more than 50 feet to do a cluster subdivision. We didn't necessarily say it had to be treed though, or
No.
Is that something that you all would like to see? So basically what we have is a good question or a good thing to bring up. The way that this is written now, it doesn't necessarily tie these to a subdivision or a cluster subdivision. If you all want to treat those separately and spell out what those need to be, let's talk about that and we can include that.
I think we need to either spell it out or put something in here that says this is not applicable to cluster subdivisions.
Okay. Does that mean you all don't want to set a minimum of plantings for cluster subdivisions? Or you do?
Can we address that in the subdivision ordinance? Would you be comfortable with that?
Well, we set a distance.
We did.
Setback.
Yeah.
From roads.
Right.
I believe it was from primary roads and
secondary roads.
Secondary roads.
And we also did it with different.
But I don't remember
yeah,
us
zoning.
talk,
Yep. Uses.
I don't remember us talking about plantings. We just put a distance.
Right. We just said buffer. We
No,
didn't
we
talk
didn't
about the
talk about, we didn't talk about any kind of buffering, just setbacks, right?
I mean, if it was a field, I'm not sure I'd care. It's about getting it back away from the highway because people are already going to be close together, and it gave everybody a little bit of a distance between them without the residents in the cluster subdivision don't have to listen to the noise of the road. They don't have to, deal with all of that, and passerbyers don't see this really dense, development. I'm not sure I care about putting in a landscaping requirement in that kind of a buffer because we were talking 300 feet or something, weren't we? That'd be a hell of a buffer with trees.
But Stephanie, if I'm reading that right there, right, so that would be to like Mr. Kendrick's point.
Restriction line more than landscape.
If you've got a rather large subdivision, it's A2, say, cluster, they would still require a 30-foot width wide buffer.
If that falls in the HCOD.
Right.
Right. If not, it would not.
Yeah.
I just don't want somebody reading this and going, well, look, this, table 8.3 says that I'm putting in a subdivision, R1, and it says I only need 50 feet setback. It doesn't quite say it that way, but I don't want them to get confused.
No, I think we're getting confused. I think we were talking about building setbacks before, and now we're talking about landscape buffers, which are two different things.
Yeah.
Right.
I
And
think
so,
a landscape buffer can exist within that building setback buffer.
exactly, thank you. And those things will be defined. So if it ever comes into question, then staff can say, no, see, here's the definition of buffer and here's the definition of setback.
I'm guilty of it myself, reading things and reading in what I want it to say rather than what it actually says. So if everybody's comfortable, I'm good with just leaving it alone, and I drop my whole comment.
Yeah, I understand. I mean, I think it's
I think it is valid. When you first started, I was hearing that there should be some kind of landscape buffer, some kind of screening between, say, A2 development and a cluster A2 development. Maybe we need to get cluster in that chart. It's a beautiful chart, but we can really mess it up tonight if you'd like.
It can still be beautiful, but bigger than it is.
Yeah. Is that what we're thinking?
I don't think it's a bad idea at all. I think it's just something we didn't think about. the last
Because
time.
we know how clusters work. They increase density significantly.
Right.
So it's really not A2 anymore.
No, you're right. I mean, what's 40,000 square foot lot where you've got a lot of them. Yeah.
I may be confused, but am I confused? We're not allowed to restrict cluster any more than any other subdivision, right?
That's true.
So they have to have the same standard for a cluster subdivision as we would for a standard regular major subdivision, right?
Well, that's a good point. Would code allow us to put an additional buffer on a cluster subdivision over and above a?
What I would suggest here, if you want to go the route of saying subdivisions within a district, I would say major subdivision. So 10 or more lots, then you have to be either type A or type B. Y'all can decide what you think is appropriate for those, and we can add that in.
Dumb question. Would we do that now, or do we go back to the subdivision ordinance for that one?
We would do it now.
Okay.
It would become a part of this. So basically, I mean, unless you think it could be differently, I would put it above A1, A2, A3 under the yellow box. It would just say major subdivision against A1, major subdivision against R1, etc. So it would go just right in here. So I think tonight what we would do is decide, do you want it to be a type A, B, or C? Or somewhere in the middle. I will say it's probably best to keep it a little streamlined and to use one of the three, whichever you think is the most appropriate. And then, of course, against what districts? Would it be, type B against anything?
The way it is now, type A is between similar type districts.
Correct.
And it gets wider as the usage.
As the intensity, yes, yeah. Incompatibility grows, so the buffer grows, is the idea of it.
Not only width, but in density.
Correct.
I like the densities. I mean, when I see 15-foot, 2 deciduous and 1 ornamental, and 6 shrubs, I mean, you could actually clump those and not do it in a linear fashion. You could clump it and make it a little more natural and less of a buffer. But once you get to B, now you're getting into a more dense, continuous.
To that point, we have some language, I want to say it's in 835, where we say in type A and B, it should be dispersed so that it's not in a straight line and does look a little more natural, but that type C is more or less to be a living fence. We require 2 staggered rows to make it a little more pronounced. Is anyone liking type A for major subdivisions against these districts?
Against which district?
I'm asking you.
Oh, residential?
Just a starting point.
Type A residential, I think.
In all ags and all 3 residentials, or R1 and R2? Do you want a little bigger between a major subdivision and R3? Or all ag and all residential type B? Type A.
I would suggest maybe if we're going in terms of the way we've done the chart thus far with intensity requires more buffer. And so if we're talking about 10 or greater homes against, say, an ag area, which might just be a dwelling, a couple of dwellings, a farm, something like that, then maybe that requires the type B to be a little more growth and buffering there. And then once you get maybe to the R1, R2, R3, then that's a type A because it is a similar development.
Yeah. I don't want to make things too restrictive in like R2 and R3 because that's kind of known density anyway, right? I mean, especially if they're abutting one another, right? Which they a lot of times do. Rebecca, I think that's a good suggestion.
Does anyone disagree? In agreement? In agreement.
All right.
Okay. All right. Any other questions on this slide? I think we've buttoned this one up, but I just want to be sure. Okay. So next up, what we have is section 835. This is still the transitional buffers. This little chart is going to allow for an alternative to a buffer. This is another measure to kind of avoid getting to that waiver process for modifications, another measure in place to say, hey, if you have a unique scenario, we can cut it down a little bit. So this would require a combination of architectural and landscaping features, essentially a fence with some plantings. Administrator would determine that this alternative is consistent. It would fall to the administrator to approve this. And essentially what we're saying here is that if someone builds a solid wall or a fence at a 6-foot height, they can reduce the required buffer by 15 feet and reduce the required plantings by 25%. This is a decrease from 50%, which is what the existing ordinance allows now. The existing ordinance allows for plantings to be required by 50%. We think that's a little high, so we cut that in half. Another option would be to do evergreen plantings in an unbroken strip, so straighten a line, nice and tight. The minimum height would be 6 foot when they are planted and 50 feet at maturity. Again, a reduction in 15 feet of the required buffer and 50% of the plantings, since they themselves would be plantings. And a third option would be a berm. The minimum height would still be 6 feet, no decrease in the minimum buffer width, that would still be required, but a decrease in the plantings. 25%. I know this one's a little bit of a doozy, so we can pick it apart if we need to.
Talking about a 6-foot high berm?
No.
The existing ordinance has 3 feet now, which is quite small. We think that doesn't necessarily cover too much if it's meant to be a buffer. If it's just meant to be aesthetic, perhaps it could, but if it's meant to cover sound and sight, we suggest bumping it up to 6 feet, but that's certainly up to you all, and we can lower that if you think it needs to be lowered.
Does anyone build a berm? That seems like a lot of work.
The subdivision near my house on Eden Road has some berms out there, and they're definitely only cosmetic.
And I want to point out here too, in the footnote, you'll see it in the chart, that no buffer would be reduced less than 10 feet. So let's just take type A, for example. This is allowing a 15-foot reduction. You would think, oh, that means I have to have no plantings at all. It can't be reduced less than 10 feet. I just want to make that clear. Oh, excellent. Anyone else like them?
I'm going back to the walls and fences.
So the fence would have to be solid.
Solid, correct. And there is another footnote in this chart that walls and fences would need to comply with the walls and fences section. So just a little bit of a tie back there. So this would mean, you know, no picket fence, no chain link fence, those sorts of things. It'd have to be solid. Because again, the point of this alternative is to still provide that same level of screening that the plantings would require. We good with this? I'm feeling like we might be, but I don't want to rush you. Okay.
Everybody good with this?
Yeah, there's nothing that obviously jumps out that says that we need to make any changes.
This is in keeping with other counties, localities.
Mm-hmm. I want to say we maybe looked at your neighbors for this one as well. A lot of the landscaping section will be heavily aligned with your neighbors. I'm trying. Everybody just take a break while this doesn't want to work. Okay, break's over. Okay, next up, screenings and enclosures. This is section 836. We have revised this section to require screening for certain elements rather than the use. The way that it's written now in the ordinance, it's almost speaking to uses, whereas we are saying regardless of the use, trash cans, HVAC systems, air conditioning units, outdoor storage areas, whatever the element may be tied to as far as a use, that it needs to be screened, and that it can be a combination of stone or masonry or some other opaque fence, a double unbroken row of evergreens, or another planted berm. Again, this doesn't apply to single and two-family dwellings or agricultural uses.
So that leaves commercial, office, apartment,
Correct. Yep.
multifamily.
Apartment buildings would fall under this. And then all commercial uses, all industrial. This one's pretty straightforward.
This
Any
is brand new.
question?
This is requiring a solid screen for a dumpster.
Correct. Kind of like what's in that picture there. Like I said, there's something in the ordinance now, Lewis, you can correct me on how exactly that works, but it seems to be forgiving. Any questions on this?
I like
Seem good on it? Okay. Moving on through to parking lot landscaping. This is section 837. Another reminder here, this stuff would not apply to single or two-family dwellings, and for that matter, parking garages. We have overall simplified these standards. There are some parking lot landscape standards in the ordinance. They are tiered. They're a little bit nuanced. We have streamlined them and reduced them a bit to make them a little easier to understand and for developers to come forth with. So what we've done here is a landscaping strip is required when a parking area abuts a residential or agricultural district, or by default a residence, or a public right-of-way. It would require a minimum of 1 deciduous tree for every 40 feet. I want to say that maybe is increased from 1 for every 50, if I have it correct. And then 5 shrubs for every 40 feet. We also say that this strip may include a sidewalk or a trail. That would not negate what is required. It could just include a sidewalk. They would still be required to have those plantings. Right now, the existing ordinance requires, based on the parking space total, rather than just a parking area or not a parking area. If it's 19 or fewer spaces, it's a 4-foot landscaping width, strip width. Lewis, correct me if I'm wrong. And then this is in your draft as well. And then if it's over 20 spaces, it is a 4-foot landscaping strip and a wall, if I'm not mistaken. So we've just simplified this a little bit, again, to be a little less nuanced, but you're still getting a fair amount of screening here. Any questions on how this change would work? And what we're talking about right now is exterior landscaping around the perimeter. We're going to get to parking lot islands, interior landscaping on the next slide. So this would just be around the perimeter of the area.
So just a comment, at the very beginning of this, you talked about sight lines at road intersections. One of my pet peeves is going into parking lots where they bring stuff right up to the edge of the entrance or the roadways through there. Could you put something in that talks about ensuring that there's reasonable sight lines for traffic?
Yeah, what we could do is we could just make a reference back to Division 1 of this article. The very first thing that's in this article is that visibility, and I think it even says required landscaping or plantings. So when you have your draft, I'm going to show you what it looks like. It's this page right here. This is basically saying that nothing within these site triangles, nothing can be in there. Required landscaping's included.
I don't, because you're moving slowly inside of a parking lot, I don't know that it needs to be 20 feet.
Okay.
But I can't tell you how often I nose out until I've almost got my car into the lane of traffic in order to see whether anything's coming. So if we could just put something in there that pulls it back a little bit. I don't know that it needs to be 20 feet like on a major roadway, but inside a parking lot or the entrances, exits from a parking lot is just, I find it a huge irritation, and I think it's a little dangerous.
Is everyone on board with adding some language in?
I have a question. Did that's just like a standard distance that that you
I
get?
want to say that 20 feet's in the existing ordinance now, but we have used it elsewhere and we have seen it elsewhere. Louis, it's in your existing, right? 20 feet? Yes. But we can certainly add some language here into this specific parking lot landscaping section that says to keep those.
So I like the fact that you kept shrubbery in the islands down to 3 feet. That, maybe that satisfies it. Assuming that the owners actually keep them trimmed to that height.
There's also some language in there that all plantings must be maintained, so you have that in your back pocket as well.
Yeah, that's always been a problem just because we don't have anybody to enforce
Right.
when it dies and, you know.
Yeah, I'd like to pull it back maybe 6, 8 feet from the end of the islands.
Yeah.
And around the entrances and the exits, something like that.
Okay, everybody.
Yeah.
Well, they're talking about having islands on the interior of the parking lot.
Okay.
I jumped the gun a little bit. That's parking lot landscape islands, which is section D of this. And if you run those out to cover the front of all your parking spots and you're putting landscaping in that, I'd almost like to pull it back maybe like, half a parking spot or
Okay.
3/4 of a parking spot to make sure that you got some visibility.
Okay. Anyone disagree with that? Agree?
No, I think you're right. Yeah.
Okay, you have it. Okay, I think we got that. Are we ready to move on to parking lot islands?
Yes.
Speaking of, okay. All right.
Sorry.
Parking lot landscaping. So this is for islands. This would be the interior of the parking lot. Here are some examples. These interior islands would be required for parking areas that have 20 or more spaces. The existing ordinance requires these only for parking areas that have 50 or more spaces. This is just to add a little bit more tree cover, beautification, et cetera, et cetera. This can also help with some stormwater and those sorts of things, having more trees on site. So we've decreased that. And then parking areas with 3 or more parallel parking bays. So basically, if you have 3 rows of parking, it would require some interior parking islands. This would be a minimum of 10% of the parking area. That is how it will be determined, the minimum amount of islands. 1 tree for each 5 spaces. And then the remainder of those areas could be shrubs, ground cover, grass, flowers, etc. Minimum width of 8 feet for each one, and then dispersed throughout the parking lot. We have not included language here that says they need to be, it just would depend on the design of the parking lot. So we have included some language here that they need to be a little bit dispersed. Any questions about this? I feel like there are some.
Next time we have a Walmart come in or something like that and they want to put in a giant parking lot, they're going to love this one.
Yeah, I know. So I like it, but the back end of it is they're just going to take up more space with the parking lot.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's not really helping that much with impervious area.
I know.
You have to increase the lot size
Right.
and the travelway length. So it's
What do y'all, have you heard pushback on this and other?
I've not, every community is a little different. Some are, we want all the trees. We want to make sure there's tree canopy. We want shade in our parking lots. We don't want it to be a heat island. And there are some things in state code as well that we could incorporate that says, and instead of kind of specifying the number of trees, it's here's your percentage, like canopy percentage that you have to provide. If it's a commercial or a residential, there's limits there. And then other communities are, we don't care. We don't, it can be a big hot black spot.
In the communities that you've looked at, for comparison's sake, that are more developed, have more large shopping areas, do you know of any break they give the developer? I think having the islands and if they're maintained, they're great, My wife gives me grief all the time about pulling into a lot that's shaded so the car is not so hot when she comes back out to it. That aside, having one of those down every double row gets to be a bit much. I'm just thinking the Walmart. Now, wouldn't have packed them because they're already there, but
Yeah, I don't think it's for practicality, if you will. I think it's for more beautification. If I'm
Correct. And urban heat effect.
correct.
Just cooling the parking lot down
Right.
for shade and those sorts of things.
So if you're looking for efficiency, then take them all out. But if you wanted to keep it attractive, then keep the trees.
I'm thinking something of some kind of a compromise of rather than ever double row of parking, having a landscape strip between it. If the parking lot exceeded a certain size, we drop that down to
So reduce the
one
number
of
of
those
strips.
strips
Yeah,
every other double row,
I'm fine with that.
something like that.
Yeah, I'm good with that.
Yeah.
I agree. I think part of the solution might be increasing either the number of lots or increasing the threshold. I'm worrying about the burden to small businesses and entrepreneurs who may not be able to do both things on their existing.
So my first question back is where we have basically made it more restrictive, where we've lowered the threshold. So basically right now, only parking areas with 50 or more spaces require this stuff. We have lowered that down to areas with 20. Do we want to bump that back up? Everyone thinking yes?
Yeah,
Or
I
somewhere in
think
the middle, maybe?
somewhere in the middle, maybe 30.
To me, it softens the look. So right now, just having Walmart in mind, in 10 years, what's that parking lot going to look like? To me, it's going to feel sanitized. Where if we had some of this earlier, it would have softened it a little bit.
You get some of the strip shopping centers that you see even in Fredericksburg now that have sort of declined and they've not done maintenance. You got this sea of broken up asphalt.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I got to tell you, in my prior life, I hated parking lots with islands in them when the winter came and you had to get rid of the snow.
Oh yeah.
So they're great until then. So I mean, I'm just looking for something that for a developer, particularly, it's not quite as restrictive, but at the same time, keeps us from having these huge seas of asphalt.
I'd argue we go back to 50, because at 50, they'll still be subject to perimeter landscaping, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Correct.
I see.
Every parking area will be subject to the outer perimeter. It's just not every parking area will have the islands.
I see the purpose of what you're saying, reducing it so that you can prevent what you just said. However, I also see what you're saying, the practicality of, hey, let's just have, how's it going to interrupt the actual functionality of it? I think that the solution would be to maybe not decrease it from 50, but maybe or to 20, but to decrease it to 30 or 35, or maybe a little bit slightly higher number. Sorry, Jesus is calling me.
Anyone else have a thought on 30 or 35?
I like 35 and four or more double loaded or single loaded parking bays.
Okay.
I think we're really talking about larger projects and someone trying to buy a business with a non-conforming situation that may.
Okay. Mr. DeVries, are you?
Stuck on 50.
50. Okay. Is anyone else stuck on 50?
I don't think the difference between 35 and 50 is that much. If you're talking about a double loaded parking, drive, that's 7 cars on each side, so I don't know that that's a huge deal. I sort of like the 50 as well. What I'm leaning toward is saying that if the parking lot goes over like 100 cars, you have this landscaping strip inside the parking lot every other row, you know what I mean? And then if it goes over 200 cars, you can stretch it out to one of these strips every 3 rows. Is that?
Well, I'm good at leaving it at 50.
I will say, Rebecca, you tell me if my brain's just not working. I think that scenario, that may push for a bigger overall area if they still have to meet those minimum parking spaces, but
I don't think the idea of building a parking lot and putting down more spaces just so you can reduce the number of landscaping strips you got to put in is going to meet their economic justification for doing that. Because dirt and a few trees and a few plants is a lot cheaper than asphalt and subbase.
Yeah.
But at least on a large lot, it gives them the ability to maintain it a little bit less intensively. And I still come back to the winter. I know we don't get a whole lot of snow around here, but when you do get it, clearing a parking lot's a major pain in the backside. So I just feel like that's gets us something that looks a little better. It gives the people who park there a little bit of shade. Yeah. But I don't think it's a huge burden on the business.
I'm wondering, what is a 50? Do we have, and Lewis, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, do we have any examples of what like a 50 car parking lot would be around here? Like, I thought that'd be more than 50. Yeah, but yeah, I'm thinking like, I'm trying to think of like the minimum threshold, something like that. Like
Something less than 50?
Yeah. Like, let's say that, yeah, to Mr. DeVries' example, what about like Dollar General or something like that?
I think that was around 30, but I can pull that up right now.
Oh, that's more than that. Yeah.
So the new Dollar General on Paspatanzi, that one has 44 parking spaces.
Okay. That's not.
Maybe a restaurant would be more.
Yeah, that's not that big, I don't think, right? I mean,
I can just have this.
Yeah. I'm good with 50.
okay, I feel like we have a 50 camp and a 35 camp.
I think I've heard most say 50.
50?
I think the
Okay.
majority has said 50.
Okay, 50?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna bump that back up.
Ready for 50.
And we're gonna do parking areas with 4 or more parallel bays. I heard that.
That's good.
Yes? Okay. Anything else on this? We're doing really good. We're about halfway through. I
Yes.
just want to give everyone some hope. Anything else here?
That was the toughest half, right? Second half flies by.
All right, if we're done with parking, landscaping, we will move on to walls and fences, which should be fairly smooth. All right, so
Said about parking.
did I? I didn't mean to lie to you. All right, so for walls and fences, what we have here is that this would apply to new, reconstructed, or replaced walls and fences, except those that are for building support, temporary construction, the little fencing that you have along those sites, soil and erosion control fencing, or tree protection. For example, if you were redeveloping a site and you have existing trees, you put a little netting around them. Landscaping berms, walls and fences at government-owned facilities, or walls and fences for livestock or other agricultural uses. Those items would be exempt from these. In section 843, we have some location standards for walls. What we say is they cannot be located in a right-of-way. They cannot be located in areas that it would block natural drainage flow or sight lines from vehicles and pedestrians, or in a place that would prevent access to fire hydrants or other fire and emergency medical personnel elements. They can be located within setbacks and thus yards. If they are located within an easement, we have some language that written authorization is needed from that easement holder. And if we have some language in here that if these walls and fences are located within buffers, that they don't disturb the plant material, whether it's existing or put in. For height standards, moving on down, section 844, maximum of 4 feet if it's between the street and the front of a building. Unless a special exception is granted, these are the following maximums. In agricultural, residential, and planned development districts, a max of 7 feet. In commercial districts, a max of 8. And in industrial, a max of 10. For materials, what is permitted would be wood or composite wood, wrought iron, other decorative metals, brick, stone, or masonry. They must be uniform along a lot line, so you can't have brick on one half, wood on the other. Not permitted, rolled plastic, sheet metal, plywood, barbed wire, or waste materials, unless those are recycled materials that end up looking, like composite wood. Here are some examples of the items that would be prohibited.
No, good. Okay.
And then we have a little bit on chain link fencing. So we've added some specificity here for chain link fencing with it being a rural locality. So what we have said here is that chain link fencing would be permitted in agricultural R1 and R2 districts, in the sense that you know and love or hate chain link fencing to just be the open steel. In R3, commercial or industrial, it's permitted, but it must be coated with vinyl. And if anywhere in the ordinance, whether it be the use standards, somewhere in this article, it requires it to be an opaque fence, it would require green or black slats to close that fence up. Thoughts on anything we've covered? We can go back if you want to.
I'd just like to understand what we're trying to do. Are we trying to elevate current standards or
Yes.
make?
Yes, elevate them. A little bit of beautification, covering things. This is both for screening purposes, but also to look nice. Anything?
No.
Okay, I didn't tell a fib this time. We're through it. On to the next one.
Woo.
Okay. Also, I just want to note too, we have some standards in walls and fences. Of course, that it needs to be maintained, but also if it has a finished side, that is to go to the exterior, so towards your neighbor, and the unfinished side would go towards you. All right, parking and loading. So
Setting a maximum height on a fence
to make sure that it's not too tall,
or what?
just aesthetic reasons, could be safety under some circumstances, but so someone doesn't come up, let's say you're in a commercial district, and you're one of these many non-conforming homes and they put up a 20-foot fence, blocks your sight of the trees or what's down the road, but we can tweak those numbers
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah.
if anyone.
Yeah, I'm gonna decide to put a green monster.
It goes both ways. I
front
mean,
yard,
what
yeah.
if there's something 30 feet tall that's really ugly?
I've
You might want a 20-foot fence.
I've seen places where homes look like fortresses.
Yeah. So are we talking about property to property inside an existing subdivision?
Correct.
We're not talking about screening anymore. We're
No, this would be fences. So if you at your home put up
Any
a
fence anywhere.
Correct. Now, naturally, HOA rules may, if they're more strict, would have something more to say,
Yeah.
but this would apply to your home. If you or your neighbor put up a fence, you would be restricted to 7 feet, which is a pretty standard fence size. I mean, that's up to, subjective, but typically 7-foot fences.
I should probably recuse myself because I want a 30-foot fence for my neighbor.
Some days I do too, some days.
I was thinking of a wall with broken glass on the top.
Okay, anything else on walls and fences, or are we ready for parking? Okay, so parking and loading, similar to other art or divisions here, just a note as you continue to review, if you haven't already, just take a close look at what we have required, the minimum parking spaces. Those things have changed. Again, based on best practices, sort of overall reducing the amount of parking. I think everyone is aware that overall today we have a lot of empty parking lots almost anywhere you go. So just to keep that in mind when you're reviewing, just to take a close look at the footnotes. So what we have here to start it off is in section 854, we have some standards for the location of the parking area to the use. We say that it shall be on the same lot to the building that it's serving unless it is an off-site area is approved by a special exception or it is shared with another use. Remote off-site parking areas are allowed, again, with the special exception review, if they are within 600 feet of the building. They may be not on the lot, but they still need to be within a reasonable distance. In those cases, a covenant or agreement would be required just to make sure that the building that has that remote parking lot maintains access to it. In section 855, we have some joint or shared parking regulations. This is saying that uses can share. Shared spaces can be used to meet the maximum of 50% of the requirements. This is up from 10%, which is quite a jump. But again, this is in the vein of reducing overall parking lots that sit empty, parking lots, a school and a church are next to each other. They don't use them at the same time. They could share it. That's the idea behind this. As it's in the slide, shared spaces must be for different periods of peak use. Again, church and school would be a good example. Maybe a building has a coffee shop and a bar. They would be using those spaces at different times, so they can be reduced to share those. Again, must be within 600 feet to the use sharing. So ultimately what we have here is that no matter whether it's shared or not shared, parking needs to be within 600 feet. And if shared parking comes up for uses that have the same peak period, the required spaces would be computed as if it were separate. So really no reduction, but they can use the same lot. Question?
Yeah. Park and ride. So we're in commuting distance of DC, Fairfax. So there's potential in the future that, especially with the new bridge, we could have someone coming in saying, hey, I think this is a good spot for a mass transportation kind of hub spot locality for going up Route 301. Where does that fit?
That's a good point. Hmm? Yeah, I mean, if it's a county-owned thing, right? Right, but
if it's on a line of some sort, but it could be a small business that's.
I'm going to say tonight, we have not worked with a ton of localities that have them, but it may be better to be a use if it's something that you think might pop up. So what I think I would like to do, Rebecca, you can say if you agree or not. Maybe we can do a little research and get back to you and give that to you, and you can look at it when you all meet next.
No, we'll need an answer now. Of course.
Please.
fair enough.
Okay. Where did we leave off? Any questions on this slide? This graph up here is just kind of showing you an example of how things might have different peak uses. Maybe on a weekday it's very busy, weekend it gets no use. A school is a perfect example of that. Any questions on this one? Okay. Next up, we have parking design standards. This is section 857. What we say here is that it must be an improved surface. However, grass parking is permitted if it is 8 spaces or less, or if any of those uses in the use standards said, you all can have grass parking. I'm thinking agritourism, event venue are at the top of my head. This figure comes from the existing ordinance. It allows for grass parking of 8 or fewer spaces. We also say that it shall be located to the side or rear of the structure unless it can be demonstrated that that's not feasible. But this is just to keep basically the strip mall effect from happening again, which is putting parking in the back or to the side. Parking areas shall be separated from walkways, sidewalks, or streets by a wall, a fence, or a curbing. This will come into play. This is sort of backed up by your parking lot landscape buffers. So these two hold hands together nicely. Screening is required when it's adjacent to residential. Fleet vehicles must be screened. This is a new addition, if I'm not mistaken. And then do we want to pause there and go over any of these before we get into the parking requirements?
the fleet vehicles must be screened, so would that, I'm wondering if that would be a hindrance on businesses.
It may, and this may be something that isn't with King George being so rural and having so many of those types of businesses, perhaps it doesn't fit. But it doesn't need to be in there, of course. This is just another nod to that beautification that was requested during public engagement, another measure.
And what would that mean?
Let's say somebody has,
A whole bunch of police cars out there.
right, well, you all would be exempt. Let's say somebody has a contracting business or a plumbing business that's in a strip mall. And they have that parking area there and they line up all their cars at the end of the day and they're big trucks and, you know, they take up a lot of space and someone might think they're not nice to look at. That would be an example of covering up a fleet vehicle. But if in King George, it's realized in reality that maybe those are more in the ag districts or away from view, maybe it's not necessary.
What if it's in a home occupation?
I can't remember, but I think we say it needs to be screened.
And we have those standards in the home occupation C category where there would be more fleet vehicles. There are standards in that.
More restrictive than this.
Even if we take this part out, for the home occupation class C that has those fleet vehicles, they would still be required to screen based on Article 7 that we reviewed last time.
I think it's better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it.
Yeah, and I don't want to be make anything disincentivizing because we've already put an extra. We're proposing additional language within the ordinances to allow for home businesses. But at the same time, I can understand neighbors may not want to see them. So,
help me understand what kind of a home business is going to have a fleet?
Like
same example. So if you're a contractor or maybe you have an excavating business and you're a home occupation class C, you're
TV installing.
Yeah, HVAC guys,
plumbing, electric,
yeah.
Any of those trades are the prime examples.
But restricting it at their home, restricting it like if they're parked up here in front of their business are two different things. I think so. Like if you've got Quarles and say they had an office here and they've got their 5 Quarles trucks out front of their own business, it's a little different than if they're they have a home business.
No, I don't.
Have a home business, fleet vehicles, if they're parked behind a dwelling, a structure, that would be sufficient. That would be screened.
I don't remember if we specified that it needs to be behind a screen or it needs to be blocked from view. We can go back and look at that, but what do you all want it to say? Do you want it to be a little bit loose as long as it's behind a building and you can't see it, or do you want it to be behind
I think for me, if they've got, let's say there's 3 vans, I'm not going to get too bent out of shape about 3 vans. If they've got 45 vans, that's going to be a different story. So is there a happy quantity that you've ever seen that they put it like?
No, we can look and see. I want to say it was Caroline or Westmoreland that maybe does this, but this is something new. We don't see it a lot. It's just not a home occupation it's new for us here.
Right.
So, I mean, we could certainly tweak it to say that. I know that's not really what we're talking about tonight, but it's 2 in the same. If you all want to tweak that to make it say, needs to be screened if it's more than 3.
I'm trying to remember, we talked about home businesses, recently.
Mm-hmm.
But didn't we limited how big they could be in certain zoning areas?
We did.
And so when they start to get of any size, they're back in agricultural, industrial areas.
Yep.
Wouldn't be interested in trying to tell them they had to screen them.
And
Many people are going to see them anyway.
I will remind you, I don't have the figures off the top of my head, but the home occupation class C is tiered. So a lot of a certain size can have 2 or 3 or fleet vehicles. The next size up can have more, and the next size up can have more. So chances are, unless it's a huge lot kind of far back, they shouldn't have 20 fleet vehicles.
Right.
Does it, tell me if I'm wrong, it sounds like we maybe want to take it out of community design standards, but leave some language for the home occupation class C?
I don't know. Maybe I kind of agree with Mr. Williams. It might be better to have it and we could tweak it later. I don't know.
I do agree with that statement in general. I'm just sitting here thinking, how likely is it we're going to see that anytime soon? So maybe if you put it in, it wouldn't apply to very much anyone.
Would you prefer to leave it but soften the language? So it's not saying it needs to be screened, but it needs to be, parked in a place that's it's not visible, or screened if there is no invisible place of the parking lot? Or, as Mr. Williams said, leave it the way it is, see how it acts in reality, and then go back and tweak it.
I think we can tweak it later. I don't know that this has ever come up, right?
Okay.
So if you wrote it so that it was screened or to the rear of the structure, and that would cover anything that sort of happened.
Yeah. That's cool.
Agree? Okay. All right. Another couple of basics here that we have for the parking design standards. Entrances and exits need to meet VDOT standards, of course. Handicapped parking is now required based on the building code. Area is 9 by 18, which is comparable to what's in the existing ordinance now. Compact spaces are allowed at a maximum of 30% of the required spaces. And we have simplified the interior aisle measurements, really just cut those down into, they need to be 90 degrees, a slight angle at 60, or parallel. Any questions on those? And I will say we're not going to tonight, for the sake of time, get into the changes to the required number of parking spaces for uses. Check your footnotes there if you have anything. Of course, when you all meet again next month, get us any comments, but we aren't going to go over those changes tonight unless anyone has questions that they've already seen. We are not.
That's the only reason I came here tonight.
Unless someone wants to talk about it, then you can tell me.
So do you see anything coming down the line for EV requirements?
We haven't yet. I thought this would come up. Rebecca, you come up first. In more metropolitan areas, definitely. We can certainly add something in there, but I don't think we're seeing anything yet.
Yeah, I don't want to muddy it. Well, all I'm asking is if there's something that's on the cusp of being approved, or anything that you've kind of seen a trend for mandates.
I haven't, and I don't think anything's in legislation yet.
That's what I wanted.
But maybe just keep whoever stays on the planning commission, keep up with it annually. That may change overnight. Those technologies go like that. But as of now, no, there's nothing that.
I just know the federal push towards EVs, and I can imagine that there would be a federal push towards accommodation. But
like charging stations.
Yeah. So if there's nothing on the horizon, again, I don't want to muddy it. Just if there was something coming,
not yet.
Addressing it early instead of ignoring
it. We know of. But I would every year, whether it's the zoning ordinance that you come in and look at just for a fresh eye, or the comp plan, whenever it is that you all are doing it, just keep an eye out for those things and take it as it comes. But right now there isn't. Any other questions on what we've covered so far? Okay. Next up, this is bicycle parking. Again, this is something entirely new that we have added. And Mr. DeVries, if you want to talk about any of the uses that require certain spaces, we can do that at the end of parking.
When were you planning on doing it?
So we won't talk about those tonight just because it would take so long. We have a couple of other things, but let's get through these next couple of slides. And then before we...
When were you planning on doing it?
It'll just be incumbent upon you all to review it when you all have your next work session. If you have any comments, concerns, get those to Lewis and Heather, and they'll get it to us.
We can do it by writing. I don't care.
Okay, perfect. But we can talk about it tonight if it's easier.
All I want to say about it is I would like people to look at Spotsylvania County Code 23-5.9.3, because I think that's a good template for,
0.9.3.
Repeat it again, sir. I'm sorry.
23-5.9.3.
Thank you.
Parking requirements for Spotsylvania County. I think it's a good model.
Okay.
It's more comprehensive than what you showed us.
Okay. We'll look at it.
And the reason I think I'd like everybody to look at it is because, for example, apartments, you've just got apartments, two per unit, where in Spotsylvania, it's based on number of bedrooms. I think that's gonna bring the number of required spaces down and be a little bit more fluid.
Okay, we will have a look at that. Any other comments about required spaces that anybody saw? But feel free to get those in writing and get those to staff, and they can get those to us, and we'll get you some answers. Ready for bicycle? Okay. So this section is new. This is section 859, and this came directly out of public engagement. What we really heard was bike lanes, which isn't necessarily something that can be done here. So this was our first answer to maybe incorporating something that can introduce bike parking in for you. So what we've done here is required it for commercial development that's larger than 10,000 square feet and multifamily developments, any apartment building. This would be 1 bicycle per 30 required parking spaces. It must be visible from the front of the building. Materials in the rack must be secured, weather resistant, maintained, etc. Can't be located in setbacks or required buffers and landscaping. And I want to say, oh, here we have it. It's a maximum of 10 bicycle spaces. So that would be the max anyone would be required to have. This is just to sort of tip your toe in the water, see how people react to it. I don't know if there are bike lanes here now or if there are plans for them, but we did hear this in public engagement, so we wanted to make sure that we saw that come through. Thoughts, questions, concerns?
I'll be somewhat facetious here. King George, we probably need places to tie up horses more than we need bike stands.
I was
There.
thinking four-wheelers, sir.
Well, I mean, I just don't see a lot of. We don't have the roads to support a lot of bike use. I mean, the folks that are very much bikers and do it as part of their life, they're going to use the roadways as they are.
Okay.
I mean, I could use some help here. I don't know of any future plans to have more bike
There's been a lot
traffic,
of talk in the
roads.
past about multimodal trails,
Yeah,
which would include
trails I could see.
bicycles.
Yep, sure.
And I think we've heard from the public a lot too, that it's a deficiency that we suffer from. A lack of shoulders, a lack of trails. So chicken before the horse. We're getting parking spaces for bicycles before we get a place to use bicycles.
If we limited it to the development areas,
Yeah, that might be why it's worthwhile, just like they were saying, dip your toe in and
And this,
multifamily and large commercial, and at least it's a good gesture.
Well, areas like the 2 overlay districts, the Dahlgren district, I hear a lot about why aren't there bike lanes or places to park my bike? These are, top tier professionals who are asking this.
Mm-hmm.
So I hear the same thing that you heard at your community engagement about unfriendly to bicycles, especially in the high density, all the consultant areas. They don't want to get in their cars if there's an alternative. All our SAICs and khakis and what are the Chick-fil-A that we just built, and the historical district is essentially a walking biking district. At some point, you're going to have walking and biking as conflicting uses. Like Jeff Stonehill says, let's get it right now. Let's get a sense of what we agree on. And dip the toe in the water.
On board, mostly?
I don't have a problem with it.
Okay. Want to leave as is and tweak it as you go? See how people respond? Okay. Up next, we're almost finished with parking. And then, hold on. It wants a break. Okay. All right. Next up, we have off-street loading. So, of course, the complement to parking areas are loading areas. We have increased the minimum size from 12 by 30 feet to 45 feet. Within the HCOD, these areas must be located to the side or the rear and shall be screened. When adjacent to residential districts, must also be screened. And we have changed the thresholds, if you will, of how these uses are, or these loading requirements come through. So the current ordinance provides examples for uses that might have loading areas, manufacturing, hotel, hospital, I can't remember the exact ones, that exceed 3,000 square feet, and it kind of stops there. So what we have suggested is a new tiered method of requiring loading spaces or loading areas. So what we have here is that for commercial and industrial uses, except the ones listed below, and then there are going to be 4 categories of area, and then the required loading spaces for those. So we've kept with the existing ordinance. Anything under 3,000 feet would not require loading spaces. Anything that's between 3,000 and 15,000 square feet in floor area would require 1. Anything between 15,000 and 1 square foot in floor area up to 100,000 would be 1 space plus another additional for each 20,000 square feet. And you get the idea, it bumps up from there. And then we have listed separately for multifamily dwellings, funeral homes, hotels, offices, and hospitals, and other clinic types. These see a little bit more activity, which is why we have separated these out. Any thoughts?
Why did it go to 45 feet?
Just to allow a little bit more room as trucks get a little bigger.
Right, that it allows, but why are we making that a minimum? I mean, if someone needs a larger space, they can incorporate it into their plan and do it, but why would we require a dollar store that has nothing more than a bread truck come up every couple of days?
We can lower this back down and set a minimum, just keep it as is, and then if it's a larger Walmart, Food Lion, et cetera, could be bumped up.
Well, they would do that themselves, is my.
Right, that's what I'm saying, right. And then they could just do it that's, according to their size.
Yeah,
Want to bump
I
it?
don't think we need to impose any more impervious
Agree?
areas on people, do we?
12 by 30? I'm seeing many head shakes. Okay.
Similar question for dwelling multifamily. In my head, I'm just wondering a duplex. So a duplex would be considered multifamily.
So a duplex would be 2-family dwelling in the new ordinance.
All right.
Multifamily would only be an apartment building.
Okay.
It could be, 3 units or 30 units, but
That was my concern, was the definition multifamily. And in my head, more than one means multi.
so I don't know how it is now, but a duplex will be 2-family dwelling, which will not be included in this ordinance, the way it's defined.
Louis, is that how we define it now? Duplexes. Right. Okay. I just didn't want a parking space for loading to be imposed on a duplex.
No, you missed that whole, we've gone through that prior to your membership.
Oh, before I got here. Way before. All right, thanks.
Other questions on this? Concerns with changes? Also, it goes without saying these areas must also be improved surfaces, so hard dustless surfaces. VDOT standards need to be met, those sorts of things.
And that's the same gravel, brick.
So for these, we're saying no gravel. Actually, how do we have it written? Could we do gravel for loading areas? I want to say it's fully solid. Could be. Give it back to me. Hold on, please.
Surfaced with an improved dustless surface.
Let me see how we defined it. So the way that we have improved surface defined, it does not include gravel. That would be separate. We talk about grass and gravel parking. So otherwise it would be improved. Hold, please. So we included gravel for parking areas just because the vehicles aren't so big. But we can certainly add gravel for loading areas. I feel like typically we see loading areas that have a hard paved surface, but it may not be true in every scenario.
Surface for its own reason.
If you got a roll of dolly or something over it, you probably want a hard surface. I don't think it's a big issue. I think most businesses that are going to have regular deliveries would prefer to have a hard surface anyway.
Yeah. Yeah.
Are there any requirements for handling of hazardous materials and drains, gutters, sewers?
Not in here, but we should have something in. Did it go here? We don't have anything here. What we have is in the use standards for commercial parking lots. I believe we have some language, but that would just be commercial parking lots that operate as a parking lot. So if you would like to add some of that language in here, we could certainly take note of that. And do you mean for parking areas in general or just loading areas?
I think of manufacturing, commercial, and handling of toxic material, of hazardous materials.
I will say that any use that we have in the use matrix that would have hazardous materials or something that would be an extra pollutant in the use standards, which they should have them, all of them, that would have a hazardous material, we say hazardous materials must be disposed of properly in accordance with any state and federal regulations, whether that's in the loading area, the parking area, in the kitchen, wherever it may be.
We're going straight into Two Rivers here. I mean, what goes into a sewer or gutter outflows to.
A lot of it's going to be, like she just said, it's going to be state and federally regulated, like OSHA and all the other things. It's going to regulate all of that. So I don't think she has to spell that out in this.
Well, I know that section in the state statutes are, I believe, are weaker than they should be in a waterfront intensive area. We were that close to freshwater, a whole county.
Yeah, so that sounds like
everything goes right into the.
So that sounds like some state legislation that maybe we need to take up with.
Take it up with them.
Yeah.
All right.
Any other questions on loading?
No.
No? Okay. Any more on parking before we move on to signs? Okay. 10-minute recess? Yes? No?
Okay.
I make a motion.
Okay, me too. I second.
Seconded.
Second motion.
All in favor? All right, 10-minute recess. Thank you. I think we do.
Really? Yeah.
We'll make a motion to come back into order.
Come back into order.
All in favor? All right, we are back in session. Okay, Stephanie, please.
Okay, let's see. We're on to signs now. All right, so what I'm going to do, we have 3 more sections to get through. Signs, open space, and utilities. For signs, I'm going to focus on the changes rather than what is included overall. So to the prohibited signs, we have added a few things. We have added signs that are affixed to poles, trees, rocks, etc. A picture of that is shown here. We have added signs or banners that are across the right-of-way unless they're approved by the board and VDOT. Again, another example is shown there for you. We have also added signs that are on stationary vehicles or trailers. Again, photo showing you what that would look like. We have also added signs that extend the roof line of a structure or the parapet wall. We have also added to prohibited signs, signs that might emit sound, smoke, etc. Signs, and then finally the last prohibition that we have added is signs of an adult use nature. This is something that really comes out of state code. It's exactly as you would imagine, so we have added those in here. Any questions about things we've added to the prohibited signs? Pretty straightforward. All right, next up we have exemptions. Again, I'm going to go over the big changes here. So what we have done is we have sort of restructured signs to be different categories of signs, 2 of which are, or 1 of which is something that we call small signs. This includes portable signs. The best example of this would be a little A-frame for a sandwich shop or a food truck, something that goes out onto the sidewalk during business hours and comes back in at night. This also includes what is defined as minor signs. This is also defined in your ordinance. These are 3 square feet max, 4 feet in height max. They're typically no trespassing signs. Maybe you have your last name written on a big rock and it's at the end of your driveway. Those are the sorts of minor signs those would include. It's a maximum of 2 total per lot. Temporary signs are another small sign that is exempt. These are signs for events, 3 square foot maximum, unlimited amount. The big change here is that the existing ordinance allows temporary signs for events at 16 square feet total. We have cut it down quite a lot just to cut down on big signage. But on the flip side of that, the existing ordinance says that you can only have 2. So we are saying you can have as many as you'd like, but they can only be so big. Thoughts about this change?
So is a 3 square foot sign kind of like you picture a sign on the side of the road advertising the business, or a political sign, those kind of things?
That would be a minor sign. This would be temporary signs. Let's say that, I don't know if there are fairgrounds here. Let's say there's a fairground and there's a little event going on. A signage for that would be a temporary event for a sign. Those would also be 3 square foot maximum, but you can have as many as you'd like. Whereas right now, you all allow those up to 16 square feet, but you can only have 2.
So what about recovering those signs? So if it's a temporary event, unlimited, go for it. Event's over.
45 days?
2 weeks later, those temporary signs are still there.
We have language in here, I'm sure of. I don't know if we have a limit. Okay, 30 days. So because it's written in here, if it's still up after 30 days, it's enforceable. We say that temporary signs have to be taken down within 30 days. It's on page 33.
And are these, I'm sorry, are these temporary signs like where the event's taking place, or like 5 miles down the road on the side of the road advertising that event?
Where they're taking place.
Okay. So it doesn't address the ones that might be at the intersection up here telling you to go 5 miles down the road. That's something different. You know, like you see companies have an event, or I'm thinking of a job fair, for example. They put signs up a week ahead of time that tells you where the event's happening.
It's actually not addressing if it's off-site versus on-site, because that would require you to read the sign, to enforce that. And because of the court case, that's not really something that you can do. It's more of, this is a temporary sign and I know it's been here for 31 days. I'm yanking it up. Correct.
And on portable signs, I mean, is there a requirement that they do in fact be removed in non-business hours?
Let me see. I want to say we do.
I think most
Are
businesses,
removed when the establishment is closed for business.
most businesses would do that anyway, just to avoid having them stolen. So I got one quick question for you. I don't have any kids in school, so this is not a biased question, but I noticed the school, the high school here, they have a theater group, and a couple of times a year they post a big sign in a couple of places around the county about trying to get people to come to their plays. They're a lot bigger than 3 feet. Is that a temporary sign? Is that, or is it because it's part of the county, it might be excluded?
I think it's a permanent installation, but they changed the wording.
Yeah, I think he's right. I think it's got permanent posts. They just change it.
It's on the school grounds.
I know of at least one that is not.
So if it's a permanent sign, that's what we would define in the new ordinance as a changeable sign. And we also address off-site signage. So to me, that's how that would be handled. If it's not temporary and it's permanently affixed to the ground, but it's one of those message boards with the black lettering.
It's painted on plywood. They just put a new piece
Oh.
of plywood up
Okay.
for every show.
Okay.
Their in-house artists paint a brand new one for each play.
Are they exempt because it's the school and it's not a commercial venture? Are they part of municipal government?
I don't want the drama club in here complaining to us.
That's why lose yourself.
I'm getting cautious in my old age.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things, Mr. Kendrick, where it's for the school. So I think most people will turn their head the other way if it's any violations, I guess.
I think with it being on the school property, it could be considered
So they
exempt as
put
governing.
one on the school property. They put another one down at the intersection of Route 3 and 206, 205. Actually, that might be on school property as well. Yeah, never mind. I withdraw it.
Easy. Okay.
There's an elementary school there. I forgot about.
Perfect. Okay. Where are we at? Okay, temporary signs for construction and realty. We have also decreased these as well. So what we have done here now is single and two family dwellings. This would be a for rent sign, a for sale sign, an open house sign. If it's being constructed, and sometimes not typically with residential, but they'll put a plaque up. So-and-so construction company, I'm doing your roof, hire me. We have said that those can be 6 square feet maximum. And then for all others, so commercial, industrial, etc., those could be 18 square feet in size. That is a decrease from 32 square feet. Again, there's going to be a pattern of decreasing here. It was just a call for more beautification, making things a little more aesthetically pleasing.
It's a public request.
Yes, we heard that in public engagement, both through the survey and the workshops. Good on these? Okay. All right, more exemptions. Again, I'm just going to touch on the changes here. We have exempted flag signs, 16 square feet maximum in agricultural, residential, and planned development districts, and a 50 square foot maximum in commercial and industrial, a limit of 3 per parcel, and the setback for these would be the height of the pole. And this is just to ensure that if it is in a commercial district, it happens to be next to one of those non-conforming homes, it falls over, there's a lot of ground there to cover it. That's where that setback idea comes from.
I hate to go backwards, but I think we need to talk about frequency also with those temporary signs.
Okay,
I think
frequency
the
or
reason I think that is because I've seen an instance where a company hired someone to put out temporary signs for that business, and they put them all, about 400 of them up in a half a mile on a median. Can we do something to regulate that?
we don't have a time frame here, but we do, what would be the best way?
We have a limited number, minor signs.
Not for temporary signs. Hold, please. So what we could do something similar that we do for minor signs, same size, they're the same physical size, and we limit those to 2 per lot. If you want to add a cap to the temporary ones, you could, but keep in mind, let's say, again, it's an event, a farmer's market, whatever the case may be, they would be limited to 2 of them at a maximum of 3 square feet. So for promotion purposes,
That doesn't, per lot doesn't enter into that if we're in a median or on the right of. Not their lot.
They are generally not permitted in the right of way anyway.
Right.
VDOT would not permit those.
It's an enforcement issue then. Yeah.
does that satisfy you? You want to keep here?
I think so. I
Okay.
mean, I hear what Mr. Pancotti's saying, but I still see them. Frequently, especially for the events. Right. Who's enforcing, VDOT or King George County?
Typically, it could be both. And when we do get complaints about signs in the right of way, we do act on that.
Okay. Sorry.
That's okay. All right. A couple of more exemptions that we've added here. Again, the flag signs, I think we're all on board with that. And then we have also added an exemption for recreation or sports facility signs, as long as they're on the interior of the fence. These are typically softball field, baseball field, those sorts of things. Pretty standard. I imagine there might be some here now, but I don't know. Any concerns about those?
All right, just a question. We're at that time of the year and it comes up almost every year, politics, you know, and we're 50 some days away from the primary election. There's signs all over the place already, and I'm sure more will go up. They're going to be up for more than 30 days. They're probably, I know they're greater than 3 square feet in size. We have the ordinance, we just ignore it and don't enforce it.
I think the thing that got me about that was last sheriff's election, which was in November, and the signs went up in March. That was a little bit too much. Big face.
Well, and there was, I believe it's the current sheriff's house. They had a really big one out in the front yard that was there for several months. So, politics is politics, and I don't care one way or another. Everybody's got the right to voice their opinion on who should get votes and who shouldn't, and all that other good stuff. That's their right. But we're writing something that is going to conflict with that, aren't we?
Yeah. I mean, I remember, I'm sorry. Let me turn my mic. I don't remember all this now, and I apologize, but what was our sign ordinance was not in keeping with a constitutional
Yes, with a Supreme Court decision.
Okay, a Supreme Court decision. Okay, that's right. So,
So we
what
took
were
all
the-
the content-related regulations.
right, that's
out
what it
of
was. So we can't even, so that's where I was going with this. I don't even know if we can really regulate political signs. Is that correct or no?
Correct.
Okay.
So political signs have to fall under temporary signs because you have to treat, the real estate, the political, the
Just anything, yeah.
the whatever it is, not by reading the sign, but this is something that I've poked in the ground and it's temporary.
Okay.
So you can't, and so that's where the 30 days does come into play, that as written, that should apply to the political signs. And that's a question about, is that what you want to enforce? The trade-off there is if you extend that, then circus comes to town, circus goes out of town, and you still have temporary signs there, 60, 90 days later.
Yeah, I guess I'm just saying, I don't know what the answer is either, but the reality of it is that telling the circus that's passing through town, they can only have a 3-foot sign. I could see us getting away with that. I can't see us telling any politician or party or anything like that, nope, our sign regulation is 3 square feet. Put up all the little bitty signs you want, but nothing bigger. And we're in an atmosphere right now where there are lots of signs that are up for a long period of time. I mean, it's probably not your office that's going to get stuck with it, or maybe it is, but you got any comments on how you want to deal with that stuff?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a bandwidth issue for y'all. So what do you think?
Well, and the other challenge there too is if you go through enforcement and you really are in accordance with the ordinance, you could still get that pushback of, you're against X political party or
just
individual
limiting
or-
someone's constitutional right to, voice their opinion on their own property via signs. So it is a
touchy.
tight line to walk.
And do remember that the body that we all sort of respond to are politicians.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they're not party affiliated officially, but they have their share of signs up every couple of years too.
Yeah. And it's been our general stance under the current ordinance that we don't enforce anything on those sorts of signs on private property as long as they're not, in the right of way or anything like that, under our current ordinance, they're not really addressed.
So I think that's the dilemma here. We don't want to see just signs popping up everywhere and they're exempt because they're on private property. But at the same time, it gets to be a really touchy situation about if you enforce part of them, but you ignore other ones, that's not a good place to be either.
I think another option is there are also freestanding signs, and typically some of the larger political signs could maybe be classified as freestanding instead of temporary. They have, usually a little more substantial posts to hold them up. And so freestanding signs have a 12 square foot limit, I believe, for
It's highly unusual. I don't know.
Hi, I'm Jessica Washington, the new Assistant County Attorney. Sorry for not introducing myself before we all started this meeting.
Hey, welcome.
But I just wanted to let you know that I can research into, First Amendment issues regarding political signs.
Cool. Thank you.
I can get back to you on that.
Thank you so much and welcome.
Let me ask Mr. Panicotti on, I think the issue to me is policing them up after the event, after the election, you don't want to see them at Christmas and, losing candidates. how do we enforce that? Or do we just remove them at the county expense?
Again, that's another tough one, because if we can't regulate content, right? So we can't outright say political sign, right? So it becomes dicey to have in there must be removed 7 days after the election, when that's sort of identifying what type of sign we're. Then
I
think-
will say,
Mhm.
section 866D for temporary signs says that they have to be removed 10 days after the event to which they are related. So that could be, I think any way we slice this, it's always going to be a little bit of a gray area. It's an enforcement issue, but there is language in here that says this is the cap of how long you can have them. Once the event that they are promoting or the thing to which they apply is over and done with, you have 10 days from that point to remove it.
Of course, I could see somebody saying that their political sign is not for the election, it's just showing support of whoever they like. So what is the event? The election may not be the event. It might just be a sign that says, I like this person or this party or whatever it happens to be. It might not be there just for the event of the election.
In that scenario, would you treat it as a minor sign?
Yeah,
which has a maximum per lot?
Yeah. And another comment, I've noticed a lot of the larger signs, they seem to be like a 4 foot by 4 foot sign. You know, they didn't, 10 years ago, you didn't see those, you know, you saw the stick in the ground, but you see them all over now, like the big 4 foot signs, and not the big 6 foot kind of in the middle. So that's over that limit, isn't it? Whether it's a stationary or a temporary sign.
If you all end up doing it the way that Rebecca suggested as an option, is to treat these bigger ones as freestanding signs. Those are allowed up to 12 square feet in residential and agricultural districts, even larger in commercial. But if not, and you do treat them as the temporary, they would be limited to the 3 square feet, unless you all, as a blanket statement, want to increase that 3 square feet maximum for temporary signs.
My question is, though, even if it's the 12 square foot sign, the signs that we see around the county now for the political signs are 4 foot by 4 foot. So that's more than 12 square feet.
I see what you're saying.
Innately, that would be an illegal sign automatically if it had to be 12 square feet, right? If it's 4 foot by 4 foot, which is standard, it seems, for all of them.
So we'll get to the standards we've set in a few slides. So in the case of the freestanding, we could bump that up if you all feel that it needs to be covered. Again, same thing for this temporary. Or if it's bottom line going to be an enforcement issue regardless, and you want to promote them to be smaller, you could leave it the way that it's written now.
I'm just wondering, kind of like Mr. Kendrick said, I can see us telling a campaign or a party their sign must be smaller than the standard one that they produce.
So I like, personally, under your table 8.6, under freestanding, I might bump that up to at least 16 square feet. I like the idea of saying how many can be per street frontage per lot. But I'm sitting here thinking of a house off of Route 3 heading into Fredericksburg, and he took them down here recently. But he had a rail fence that was probably 60 feet long.
I know where
he had flags and a particular politician's sign up, about a dozen of them.
Yeah.
I may be exaggerating a little bit. And I'd be, as long as you don't ask me to be the one to do it, I think having the county go down and say, okay, you sort of exceeded the standards for a freestanding sign, not telling you to take them all down, but can you reduce the number of them? But I could see you or somebody in the county being stuck in that kind of a situation unless you just simply chose to ignore it. So, and ignoring it might be the smartest thing to do, but I'm not sure it's. I'm a big believer in precedent, and if you set a precedent by ignoring some and enforcing others, that just, I got an attorney back there, I think should tell you that's not a good situation to be in.
But
So,
on the other hand, private, what's on private property and a sign that's on the roadway, I think should be treated differently.
yeah, but if we're looking at signs as something you don't want a proliferation of along the roads as you drive, take the political stuff out of it. I just, if you don't, I'm showing my age here.
No.
If you don't want to see a Stucky sign, down down the highway every 100 feet, you need to have some kind of limitations out there. And they are, a lot of them get, as an individual sign, there's nothing wrong with them. But when they're everywhere, it is very unsightly. So I'm fine with us trying to have a sign ordinance. Maybe I'm beating on something that doesn't need to be discussed too much right now, but I just see headaches for somebody in the county
I agree.
if we try to enforce it.
Yeah, I agree. I think, yeah, I'm afraid that we're gonna run into enforcement issues, resource issues, potentially physical confrontation issues. I mean, it's not,
So,
yeah.
if I may, I would suggest for tonight, in the sake of time, we pause on the political sign question and the thoughts about temporary signage and where political signs fit in that. I think the assistant county attorney volunteered to do some research, and I think that's going to help us quite a bit. And then we can answer the questions in terms of enforcement from that angle once we have those answers. And I would like us to focus tonight maybe on the next parts, looking at that table and thinking about signs in general and thinking about the look and feel of King George and just generally thinking about signs. How many do you want to see as you drive down the road? How big do you want those to be when you drive down the road? How tall are you willing to let those be as you drive down the road? So let's focus on that, and then we can come back to the temporary and political issues.
I'm going to skip ahead to what Rebecca's just talking about, and then we can hop back and talk about some of the minor changes we did for standards. But this will be the most important thing I think to get through tonight so these charts here on this slide and the next slide, these are the revisions to what types of signs you can have on your lot, depending on what district you're in, the size that it can be, how many you can have, and how high it can be. Again, as just with the parking and some other things, these have been changed a bit. So we'll go over them tonight, but I would encourage you to also read the footnotes, go back through, compare it to the old ordinance if anything sticks out to you. So we'll take it first with the agricultural and residential districts. So what we say here is that you can have a freestanding or a wall sign, and one per street frontage for each for residential or non-residential uses. The total square feet for either of those signs would be 12 square feet. For a freestanding sign, it could only be 6 feet tall for either residential or non-residential uses. And basically, wall signage can be a little bit bigger here. We do have a caveat that subdivision monuments can be up to 20 square feet, as those are typically a little larger than 12 square feet. But with that, I will leave it here and open it up to questions for how we got to these numbers, if you think they need to bump up, if they need to go up to 16 square feet. I know we kind of toed that earlier about increasing those.
They
And
don't seem unreasonable.
And I want to say that the existing ordinance right now, it doesn't differentiate signs in the ag and residential districts based on what they are for, whether they're residential or non-residential. So that's also something that we've differentiated here. Lewis, correct me if I'm wrong. Okay. Again, this is just falling back on beautification, making it more pleasing to the eye, cutting down on extra big signage, superfluous signage, whether that's a size that's too large or it's a quantity that's too many, just sort of cutting back on that. And you will see here the little footnote there for the freestanding and wall signs for residential uses. That is a decrease from 50 square feet, which is a very big sign for residential uses.
I think I mentioned this before and I got snapped back for trying to regulate content, but I always thought there should be another classification for monument signs, for subdivision monument signs. I don't think that's regulating content.
So in this case, it would be a freestanding sign.
Yeah, but a whole nother classification. I mean, they're usually brick or stone or some kind of fascia. It's more of a place, a designation of a place. It's not so much a sign. And
What is it that you would like to regulate differently about those?
I would like those to be allowed to be larger than the free.
So we allow those to be 20 square feet. So there's a caveat to this that subdivision monuments can go up to 20 square feet. Do you think those should be bigger than that? We still cap it at 6 feet in height, but we do allow overall area to be a little larger.
And I think one thing to think about too is when you're talking about monument, and you're usually thinking about, you know, nice brick sort of foundation and casing maybe around it. So that does not get calculated as part of the sign. The sign calculation is the lettering and the actual sign area that fits in the.
Any thoughts here? Okay, we're going to go over commercial and industrial districts. Again, we've changed some figures here. This is largely to cut down on signage and or to mimic and be comparable with who's around you. So what we've done here is we have broken out freestanding signs, whether it's for one business or if it's for multiple. So essentially what we've done here is we've provided a threshold if it's a sign for one standalone business on one lot, or it's a strip mall or some other type of development that's a sign that houses many little signs for 5, 6, 7 businesses. So what we've done here is also added canopy signage. We've tweaked that a little bit. As of right now, it says that a canopy sign can be a maximum of 6 square feet. That could be a little funny when it comes down to it. So what we've done is just said that it can be a maximum of a half a square foot per linear foot of canopy fascia. This one is more cut and dry. This is essentially saying it would match what the canopy size is. Any thoughts on here or the changes that we've made, the maximums that we have? It goes without saying the decisions that were made here and reducing are to bring about those signs that are a little more beautiful, more pleasing to the eye.
Yeah, no, I don't have any concerns about those at all.
Easy peasy. All right, and last but not least, this is very similar to commercial and industrial. We have set a different set of standards for those that are in the HCOD, since those are primarily along the roadway. They are just a little bit smaller. I will toggle back and forth here. Oh, that's not the right one. So for freestanding, just as an example, for multiple businesses, it's a reduction to 15 feet in height as a maximum and 100 square feet in total area. Nothing too drastic here. Any questions about these?
Anything to address illumination?
Yes, so I'm going to hop back now that we've talked about the sizes and the heights and whatnot. All right. Okay, so some measurement and general sign standards. So what we've done here is we've kept your current method of how you measure. That has not changed. We've just gone over, we've included some different heights and size requirements based on what type of sign it is and where it's at. Sign setbacks are exactly the way that they are now. We have not changed those, nor have we changed illumination. It currently says it can be external or internal. Examples are shown here. What we have done is added a maximum. These are for the nits are used to basically talk about screen brightness. 700 nits is, these are some examples here. Take these with a grain of salt. It's not super bright. It's not super low. We have also added that goes lower automatically for those screen signs, the ones that flash or change. But for as far as illumination goes overall, it would tie back to that lighting. So for example, on
Just so you know, so in my head, you couldn't see that. I was thinking about the direction. So making sure that we have language that says, this is specifically for illuminating the sign, or cannot have leakage into HCOD, or
I want to
the
say we
directionality
included
of
that, but let me find where it's at.
Are we also talking about the LED signs that emit light?
All right, so for illumination, no sign shall be illuminated in such a way that light may shine into oncoming traffic, affect highway safety, or shine directly into a dwelling. Is that what you mean? And then to your point, Mr. DeVries, this 700 nits is for those LED, those lit signs with a screen on them. Nits are more or less about screen brightness.
So why are we talking about nits and we're talking about foot candles everywhere else? Because I'm seeing a situation where I don't know how many nits it would take to make 0.5 foot candles at the right-of-way line.
If it's a bulb, it would be foot candles. If it's a screen, it's a nit.
Right, but I need a comparison. I mean, are we defeating the 0.5 foot candles by lighting with 500 nits at night?
They are comparable. I don't know what the exact
defeating one with the other
equation would be. I don't know, how many nits is equal to a foot candle. We can get that for you, but they are comparable. I will say 700 is quite low. 10,000 is a typical nit for an LED sign that changes whether it's a drive-through menu or it's at the bank. 10,000 nits is quite bright. 700 is fairly low. And this is the suggestion by the U.S. Sign Council, particularly for areas that are dark sky compliant or largely residential.
500 at night.
500 at night, starting at sunset. And those type of signs that we're talking about, the LED, those are required, what we have in here, to be automatically lowered, to have mechanisms that they do that on their own.
Okay. So my confusion is because I'm experiencing on 301 North, as you come over a rise, you can see the glow in the sky before you see the sign. It's an LED emitting light, and it is very bright.
So
I can't see. I mean, one night I very nearly hit an animal crossing the road because the bright light, the contrast between the bright light and the dark pavement obscured my view of that.
So according to
I don't know if that's
convertme.com,
compliant or not, I guess is my question. That's why I want to know what a nit is.
so a nit is 10.76 to 1 foot candle. So 1 foot candle equals 10.76 nits. So we learned something tonight.
Wow.
But I will say too, I don't even know who deals with nits and foot candles more comprehensively, but the brightness that a nit has is not necessarily the same that a foot candle has. It's a different type of illuminance. I don't know how best to explain it tonight, but they're a little different in how your eye sees them. But I will leave it there. Do we have any other questions, comments, concerns about brightness or illuminance for that matter? Okay, with that, I think we've made it through signage, unless anyone has anything stirring in their brain. And we will get to open space. It's trying. Okay. All right, so you all first heard about open space from us back when we did Article 4, and we added some open space requirements for multifamily dwellings, cluster, those sorts of developments. What we've done here is expanded on that, and we have written some provisions for what open space is or is not, or what it can be and what it cannot be. And we have provided a more thorough look at what the minimum requirements are. So what we've done here, and you'll see it up on the screen, this would apply to all new development within agricultural, residential, and planned development districts. Goes without saying that exemptions would be single and two-family dwellings on individual lots, subdivisions that are less than 10 lots, and any utility and ag uses. So what we've said here is that in A1, and I won't read this whole chart for the sake of time, I'll walk you through one and then have a look and we can talk through things as needed. So for A1, the minimum would be 25% of open space for subdivisions of 10 or more lots. In A2 and A3, it would be 20%. If it's a cluster development, it's a higher threshold, just following those cluster development principles, so on and so forth. I will say, comparatively to ag and residential, the ag is a little higher, just to stick with that keeping of the rural sense, the character that we've heard so much from both, really everyone, staff, you all, public engagement. So with that, I will give you a second to read this chart and we can dive into it as it comes up. Basically, correct. Or cluster developments. Some localities will do it for, or plan developments, mixed use, resort community. Some localities do require open space for commercial. They're larger localities with a little more cohesive residential to commercial action. I don't know necessarily if it's the right fit for King George now. That's up to you all, but this would just apply to major subdivisions right now.
So Stephanie, I'm going to blame it on it getting late, but
And multifamily.
it's just my regular ignorance. How do they compare to the current?
Lewis, open space right now, it's based on,
It is based on lot size. So if your lot is and then zoning district. So it's only if your lots, here, let me pull it up.
I'm thinking though, these requirements in table 8-9 or 8.9 rather are more ambitious than what we've had, right?
yes.
Yeah,
Okay,
much.
that's all I was wondering.
Do we have current?
No.
I'd like to discuss that.
Does anyone do
I
that?
propose consideration of a standard for open space for commercial activities over a certain size threshold.
Is that?
You can only do it if there's a large development with different components. You can require open space. That doesn't really happen. I mean, it happens by default. I mean, you start with
Your
just a
setbacks.
Walmart, and we got a mall next door, and now we're getting a hotel on both sides. But it's too late to jump on it, because that wasn't done cohesively. It was done by different developers, different times. I don't know how you enforce open space in that kind of scenario.
I park next to the McDonald's, Walmart. Our dealership to get open space. Grass and food.
Right, so my question is, if we're talking about two different developers, doing two different things, and you want a requirement for open space, who do you put that responsibility on? Which one of them?
Yeah, that's a good point.
I would say, I mean, notionally, it'd be on projects, say, greater than 10 acres. It's a number, but 10 seems about right. Commercial projects of that scale should have reserved green space, included open space. Otherwise, you're gonna see a mile of car dealerships with no green break, no.
Right, but what I'm saying is that's not one developer, that's a number of developers.
That's true, but we have a densely developed commercial district.
I also want to just make one statement. I think to your point, Mr. DeCorda, that might be addressed through the landscaping, the required landscaping or the buffers. This is more usable open space. It doesn't necessarily have to, have a bike trail or we'll get into that. But I think to break up, a row of car dealerships, that would be addressed and some ground cover and some wooded area would be included through the buffering. Rather than requiring a developer to build an open space, that technically they're the ones that put it in, are only their customers to use it. How often would it be used?
My concern with that is then you use up part of the commercial space, so you end up sprawling more and more for that open space. Because now your car dealerships are spread further down the road because you have open space in between them that's not usable.
Drive down Garrison. Garrison.
Well, I think anything we're doing commercial anyway is going to have to come before us to approve. So we wouldn't necessarily have to allow that because we would control it by the approval process via the planning commission. So I think.
And that's just special exceptions and rezoning. So by right commercial development, as our ordinance stands now, does not go before you.
Right, exactly. So current commercial is what it is. But we don't have a lot of it. And so that's the thing. Anything to Mr. DeCorda's point, if you're talking about, miles and miles of commercial, that would always come before us for rezoning. So
we have commercial zone acreage.
Right, but it's not much.
Someone could literally, I think we're gonna have pressure to have more.
I agree. I mean,
retail in particular.
My bigger, I mean, if you think about it like percentage wise, so King George is 84% agricultural, either A1, 2, 3. My bigger concern right now is the cluster subdivisions skirting the requirements to kind of forego RPA stuff under the guise as green space, right? And so that's to me, I think that's why we're kind of focusing on a lot of the cluster subdivisions, because to me that's a bigger issue of density and maybe use of space in general.
May I ask and or suggest, we have a couple of more things to get through for open space that I think are important and we'll want to talk about. Could we maybe have you all talk about this at your next meeting? If it seems there's some debate up, I feel like most folks are saying no commercial, but I don't want to speak for you. But we have a bit more to get through and I don't want to keep you here all night.
No, nobody else feels.
I think you make an interesting point about long strip development of commercial property right along the highway. And I do tend to agree with you that in some areas along 301 with the increased traffic the new bridge is going to bring us, there might be some tendency to do that. But I'm not sure in my mind, because I haven't thought about it much, about how you.
It's still habitat?
I think it's more about us zoning than it is putting restrictions on the individual lot. So I do agree with her for the sake of time. Maybe we think about it and at our next meeting, we carve out some time to talk about that.
Are we okay with the thresholds that we set out here? Any concern about those?
I like it.
Okay, I'm going to keep going. All right, so we're going to go over the areas that we have included in here that could count as open space. So what we have first is natural features. A couple of things about this. This would be natural wooded areas, etc. In agricultural districts, we say that 100% of the required open space could be met by this. In all other districts, we only allow a half, 50% of the required open space. This is to encourage something that might be usable, maybe a park, a trail, gazebo, just something that's, again, a little more usable for the community. But in the respect of preserving that rural character for the agricultural districts, we do say 100% of the required open space could be these natural features. Another thing I want to note here is that the existing ordinance does not allow floodplains, wetlands, steep slopes, etc. to be open space. We do recommend allowing that to preserve those sensitive areas. You already have some things on your side, especially in the residential districts. Only half of it can be those areas. But again, just...
Areas are already preserved because they're unbuildable.
Well, I just feel like if you have those areas, what we're getting at here is that instead of having those areas and then also saving more of your lot to be open space, you can just count that towards it. So we're suggesting that you...
What I would counter that is that because of the topography of this county, I've always disliked the fact that the floodplains, the steep slopes, that winds up being the open area because they don't develop on it because it's too expensive.
Do we want to keep it the way it is now and restrict those areas?
I think the reason that it was excluded was because we wanted to get the possibility that some of that open space would be actually used by the community, developable by the community for some public purpose. It's never happened because we don't have any enforcement mechanism to do it written in here. But I think that's why we kept it.
Okay. I think what we've added here may help you get to that, but it sounds like we do need to keep the provision that those areas are not counted. Am I hearing?
Yeah. Credit, the 50% credit towards fulfilling the requirements seems about right to me. Floodplain or slope.
Well, what we could do, and what I think I'm hearing, tell me if I'm wrong, I think I'm hearing we could leave it to where in agricultural districts, 100% of the required open space could be natural areas, except floodplains, wetlands, steep slopes, which would essentially leave wooded areas. But in the residential districts, maintain it where we've proposed it to be 50% of the required open space, which is, to Mr. DeVries' point, that makes sure that some of it ends up being usable or active, if you will, or a sidewalk or something a little more than just a wooded area, but still also for the residential district saying except for floodplains, wetlands, steep slopes, then it's, I think, the best of both, but okay, I think we're all in agreement. Okay. All right. Next up that could count as open space, passive.
Let
Sure.
me come back
real quick.
Sure.
Steep slopes, floodplains, those kind of areas where they're not going to develop anyway.
Right.
Or not likely to. If we said that could count 50, 75% of your total requirement of open space, that would guarantee us that no matter how much of that there is, any subdivision would still have to have some usable space for the residents. Yeah. I wouldn't, well, I understand what you're saying, and I agree. I don't want to encourage them to try to develop, well, they can't go into the wetlands, but I don't want them to try to encourage, developing heavy treed or steep slopes or anything like that. So partial credit towards their open area, I'm good with. But what I'm looking to achieve out of this is that every subdivision that gets developed has some open area for the residents to use.
Okay.
Because, I'm thinking younger families have kids. Kids need to go somewhere. Or even the adults gives them the opportunity to walk in their own subdivision, some recreation or something. But yeah.
So then I think what the fix is that if you see up here what we say about natural features, I think we just cut that down and say regardless of the district, only 50% of that can be. On the flip side of that, next up is passive. You could require a minimum, 25% of the open space must be passive or active. We already do that for resort community and mixed use districts. You'll see it in the chart here to ensure that some of that open space is what you're getting at, but we did not include that for what would be the subdivisions, but you could.
I think that's where we're going, isn't it?
It's where I've always wanted to go, is to ensure that there is some usable area and that it doesn't wind up being just a little postage stamp size lot with a swing set on it.
Or a big swamp that you can't do anything with.
Yeah.
Right.
I think that the nuance to this would be if we add it similarly to the way we have it here. For mixed use and resort community, those are going to be bigger areas. So we've based it on square footage per 2 acres. I think to achieve what you all want to, Rebecca, tell me if you think, maybe we just set a standard, a threshold. So for A1, A2, A3, R1, and R2, a certain percentage of the overall open space needs to be active or passive, but you all let me know what you want to see that as. And the overall minimum requirements are up here if you need to go back to a baseline. So for example, in A1, we require a minimum of 25%. Do you want to say that 10% of that needs to be active or passive? 5%? All 25?
Well, 2 acres are open space. Let's say 1 acre is unbuildable floodplain slope, and 1 acre is pretty big. Okay, the cluster is 20. Cluster would be 55. Cluster development, 10 acre lot, 5.5 acres would be open space, and 2.5 would be 5 would be passive or active recreation. But could be up to preserve per se habitat. Rather, that slope be maintained as a slope.
Yeah, I think we've taken that off the table. So wetlands, floodplains, steep slopes, those are out of the deck. So those will be preserved and will not count as the open space. Would it make sense to just keep the threshold the same for all of these and just say that of the X percent minimum, 5,000 square feet per 2 acres need to be active or passive, and then it would be the same across the board? I just want to make it easy for the subdivisions that may be of wildly different sizes. So a flat percentage may.
I'm content with leaving it like that, except adding that, like on A2 and A3, 20% of subdivisions of 10 or more lots, 55% for clusters, 10% of whatever that requirement is must be usable.
Okay.
For passive or active recreation.
Okay. So 10% for A2 and A3. What about A1?
the bigger the subdivision, the more land that is because there's
Yeah.
more people using it.
I'm good with that.
Okay. Is that just for A1 and, or A2 and A3, or do you want to do that for?
Same thing for R1 and 2 and 3. But whatever, your percentages there are fine with me, I think. It's
Okay.
just that out of that percentage,
10%.
10% of it's got to, at minimum, has to be usable.
Okay, gotcha. Easy enough? Everyone on board with that? Okay. All right. Along that vein, areas that count as open space, passive or active recreation, we have added here that required landscaping and buffers can also be included as open space. Is everyone okay with that? Especially now that you've required a minimum of active and passive, that will negate some of that open space being all landscaping buffers. Okay. All right, next up we have stormwater management areas or facilities that are treated as site amenities. I have some examples here for you. This could be a little boardwalk, it could be a fountain with some benches so you can look at the pond. It can be a variety of different things. The requirements are that it needs to include or support passive or active recreation. So again, a little sidewalk, some benches and a fountain or whatever the case may be, and that only a maximum of 75% of that stormwater management area could count towards the open space.
It's not fenced, but otherwise restricted for access.
Any other thoughts? Okay. We've also included public access easements and squares and plazas. I will note here, squares and plazas will mostly come up in mixed use. They could come up in an R3 in an apartment complex. It just sort of depends how many buildings, those sorts of things. But you'll probably see those the less, but we have said that they would count. Those are typically more fountains, some picnic tables, usually some trees for shade, stairs, little things, little places to gather. Any questions about what counts as open space?
This is the first time I've seen the term public access easement. Is it defined in the ordinances yet?
If we don't have it defined, we will define it so that it's clear what that is. And that would be maybe that trail that you all have that runs through could count, that we heard so much about, that would maybe count for that.
Famous trail.
It wouldn't necessarily be
A public easement over private land.
correct. Not if, let's say, in the most simple example, I own a property along the road. I'm going to put in a bunch of apartments. You live behind me, and I gave you an easement to get up to your property. That wouldn't count. It's for your access to get to your home. But if it's a public easement used or dedicated to the public, then that could count.
Anyone could use it.
Correct. Good on that?
A
Ooh.
comment. I'm sorry, I
That's
keep
okay.
doing this to you.
It's okay.
I just have a little bit of concern about the stormwater management areas.
Okay.
A small parcel that tends to be a retention pond, which in a residential area is dangerous for kids. And that's the reason you see fencing around so many of them. So how do we address that in smaller subdivisions?
I think we could lower, maybe you could allow this if it's a certain size. We could lower the threshold altogether. Again, I think with a lot of things, it would just depend on what development it ends up coming out, and it may be, good for one and not the other. So
I'd like to encourage doing it, but at the same time, I'd like to put something in there. Maybe it says where feasible from safety concerns.
And I think some of that will naturally occur by the, development by whoever's going to insure, their property. They may decide, yes, I have to have this, retention basin, but I'm going to fence it and it's not going to be part of my, open space, usable open space. I think some of that would be natural.
Okay. You guys get my concern, though,
Yeah.
right?
How small
Yeah.
are you talking about?
I'm, you know, you got, if you get a developer in who does 20 houses,
20 small?
you know, on, you know, minimum size lots, then his stormwater retention isn't going to be very big, and it's going to be a big mud puddle that's just going to attract kids, which becomes dangerous. So if it's big enough that you can develop it more like a little shallow pond
Yeah.
with aeration and, you know, stuff, that's fine. But even then, it's,
Well,
I'm
when I,
so nervous about having it in a residential area where kids are running around.
And
when I
so,
lived in Florida, I saw this done very successfully. I do understand the direction that you're going with to make sure, you know, public safety over all else. But if it's worth anything, I have seen it done.
So I'm in Presidential Lakes, and there's 2 lakes, and I haven't heard of any incidences in them. But
I've seen everything from things that look like docks and piers, and they'll have the ropes or other safety
Is
things.
that to keep the people out or the alligators in?
Keep the people and the alligators separated. Exactly how that works out is up to each individual alligator.
Yeah.
like what you're trying to do, I'm just have a bit of a safety concern.
I think in the scenarios where you're talking about, the basin is going to be small to the point that when you then say, okay, I can only use 75% of this, and I have to incorporate it with sidewalks and something to make it actual usable, they're going to say, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to put a fence around it because it's going to be too small and too much sidewalk, you know, to make it truly fit the requirements for this. And two, these scenarios are usually going to be coming before you, and so then you can possibly put conditions on that as well and consider some of those safety measures.
Any more thoughts on this one? Okay. Some areas that do not count as open space. This, as of our discussion, has just changed this top bullet, so it will now say more than 50% of natural features, period. Steep slopes, floodplains, wetlands, etc. We've also included here that not more than 25% of cluster development setbacks, so that people don't have their cluster development setbacks and say, there's my open space. Again, getting back to that notion of we want active or passive recreation. Yards of single or 2-family and manufactured dwellings, right-of-ways, private easements, so not a public access, but a private easement, utility easements, or sidewalks that are not integral or integrated into active or passive recreation, parking areas and driveways, land that's covered. This goes without saying. If it's a playground, obviously it does. If it's a building, it does not, or a home, I should say. Outdoor storage areas and stormwater management areas that are not designed as a site feature. Some design and development standards here must be accessible to the residents or the users of the development for which it's a part of. A minimum of 40% of open space shall be contiguous. We do have a caveat here that it does not have to be a linear contiguous configuration if it's needed to be to connect to a trail or a public easement that's already there. Does that make sense? Otherwise, it needs to all kind of be together. So it's not one spot here, one spot there, and you get little 3-foot squares everywhere. And then if there is any existing open space or recreation areas already on the site, must attempt at least to connect the new open space with what's existing. Any questions about open space? We have one more thing to get through. I bless you for staying strong. We're almost there. Okay. Next up is utilities. Every time it just takes a break. Okay. So again, I mentioned this early in the night. This is something that's brand new. And this is really getting to private wells and septic. A lot of this is what state code says you can do or how state code will regulate it. It relies heavily on VDH requirements and complying with those. So now that we have provisions in the ordinance that these things need or must comply with VDH, it's a little bit more enforceable on King George County's behalf now that it's written into the ordinance. So this starts off with some reference to the King George County Service Authority regulations and just reiterates what is provided in that as far as when connection is required. We have some applicability language, again, new private wells or septic systems, or any voluntary upgrades, enhancements, or enlargements to existing systems. So not so much if it were to be damaged, that could be replaced. But if it's something that they voluntarily say, hey, I'm, doubling the size of my house and I need a bigger, well or septic, that would count. Again, we have some focus on compliance here, that they must meet VDH requirements, and that permits and certificates garnered by VDH would have to be supplied to King George County, to the county engineer before construction could start. Again, just another measure to make sure that what is being built is what VDH is expecting and approved. Again, on that same vein, systems must comply with those capacities that VDH has set out. Specific to on-site sewage disposal, these can only be located where the VDH permit says they can be located. They must be sized in accordance with the number of bedrooms on the building plans, which will also tie back into some permits that come from VDH. Because it's a Ches Bay community, 100% reserved drain field is required. And then for private wells, must be set back in accordance with the VA administrative code. We have just made reference to that in the ordinance instead of listing those out. This is something that, again, VDH will look at when they are offering their permits. Shall be set back 15 feet from all property lines unless it can be demonstrated that it cannot be or that it needs to be in that setback for some reason. We also have some additional siting standards for downslope from pollution sources or swampy floodplain areas, those sorts of things. That language comes directly from state code. Any questions here? I think that's it for utilities. Mm-hmm.
Shouldn't we be accommodating non-septic system solutions, chemical, electric, processing methods?
I don't think we should. I mean, this is all very redundant with state code and VDH regs. I think we should just be referring to them by reference. We shouldn't be printing this stuff at all.
So
We'll have to be updating this every time they update their regs, right?
we typically don't include something like this. This was direction for the project to include these things as extra enforcement. We can scale it back to reference VDH, but Rebecca, anything to add?
If that's good enough. I mean, you're saying that came from staff?
Yes, staff requested, Louis, I'll let you, if you want to.
Some like VDH regulations that the county can actually impose stricter. One of them being something like, right now the health department allows conditional septic permits, whereas the drain field doesn't actually match up with the number of bedrooms, but they put a occupancy maximum, and that is a lot harder for staff to regulate as opposed to just saying you have a 4-bedroom house, you get a 4-bedroom drain field, as opposed to you can have a 3-bedroom drain field, but a maximum of 8 people in the house. So that's one of the things that I believe we can regulate, but that VDH doesn't regulate for us. So that's just one example I can think of off the top of my head.
Feel stricter on anything in the state that should be public?
Well, this is all gonna go to a public hearing when we're done.
Yeah, it's all, they're all gonna.
So, I mean, that would be something maybe we should point out. But
I will say zoning ordinances don't always have this information in them. It lives outside of it. So we could look at other folks. But I would say that if anything, most people stick to state code, Rebecca. It's not something we see a ton of.
And to Lewis's point, the main thing that we wanted to capture is that on-site sewage, that second bullet about sizing the number of bedrooms based on the building plans. I think that is important to establish. There has been an ongoing problem and issues with that. Otherwise, we could refer to VDH if that's what you would like to do.
And another thing being just having it on-site sewage disposal, as opposed to a lot of times we get questions about having a drain field on someone else's property and having an easement on that, and that's going to create a lot of problems down the line. And that's something that VDH would allow, but that we cannot.
I like that.
That we can regulate that.
That's good.
And I will say, just for the ease of being too restrictive, a lot of this language has come either from state code or it's this basic stuff. You must comply with VDH. You can only locate where VDH says things that would be happening anyway, but we've just added some words to it.
Yeah, I understand the impulse now from Mr. Pancotti. I'm just saying maybe we could restrict it more to his concerns more than to staff's concerns. 'Cause I still think there's some redundant stuff in here that doesn't need to be there, can be included by reference, and just a little more strictly adhere to what staff is looking for.
Okay. Any other thoughts on this?
I have a question about 883A. I may be confused.
Okay, let me get to it. Hold on.
So the applicability. So am I confused in reading, if you have an existing house on a well and septic, let's say 3 bedrooms, and you're going to expand to 5 bedrooms, you can no longer you have to connect to the public system? You can't use your well and expand your septic? Is that what that's saying?
Which one are you talking about? 883?
883 bullet number A under applicability.
This is saying that this particular one is saying that these standards of the division apply if you have that house and you're expanding your house and you need a bigger well. The requirement to connect is in the King George County Service Authority. I don't know what the thresholds are off the top of my head. This is just saying that these standards apply. So if you have a 3-bedroom home, you have everything set up for that, and you're saying, I'm going to build 3 more bedrooms, then you would need to get the appropriate VDH permit applied to it.
You have to connect to the service.
No. You may. I don't know what the connection threshold is, so I won't say yes or no, but that is not what this is saying.
Like if you had a house on private well and septic now and you expanded it where you had to have a new or expanded drain field, would you be required to collect a service authority if you met those requirements as though it was a new home?
That would be a question for service authority. I don't think so. I have never seen that happen, and I would push. I'd push back on that, but
when the service authority goes into areas that are not currently serviced by municipal sewer, that we may very well be required to connect to. I've seen that happen in other places, but I don't think the county's in that shape yet.
It's just new development within a certain distance from a existing water line has to hook up.
I want to say 881 or 882 is taken directly from those King George County Service Authority regulations verbatim. So you could take a look at those. But I think it's much to what Lewis is saying. If it's in your proximity, then you do. Any other questions?
No, I'd just like some clarity on how we deviate from VDH, where we're more stricter, and just to be able to understand
So the only thing that might be more restrictive is where we say that it shall be set back 15 feet from the property lines. But otherwise, this is either with Code of Virginia, which VDH would be complying with, or we're saying you match what VDH has told you. So the only thing that we provide here that could possibly be its own decision is the 15-foot setback.
15-foot setback, and the size of the septic must match the building plan and not just
Not
this is
just
how
the
many
bedrooms.
people I say I'm going to have.
So Louis, I would almost suggest to you that to just state up front that that they have to adhere to the state requirement, except in these areas where the county wants to go a little bit stricter.
That's something we can certainly do. Another thing I would maybe want to get some input on is our local representative at the health department. Maybe I can have him take a look at this and see, where we can deviate and where we are just being redundant and should not.
We've done a lot of this work to try to make it easier for applicants to developers to understand our ordinance better. In this case, the difficulty is figuring out what's already the state requirement versus what the county wants to add to that. So, I agree. I don't like rewriting, or restating things that are in law, other places, or other requirements. Just reference to it. That way, when it changes, it's just out of our hands. But if you want some exceptions to those or additions to those, just list them is what I would suggest.
That's supportable to me too. And the reason I brought it up is we're going to face this with accessory dwellings and separate constructions on, mother-in-law apartments over the house. You're going to have more bedrooms. You're going to have to resize your septic or have it, compliant in some way. And the harder we make that in excess of Virginia VDH standards, we're working against ourselves.
Anything else, gentlemen? I think we did it. We're at the end. All right, so in the fashion that we've been doing, we will work on these edits, get them to staff, and you all will have them to look at next month, I think, is when you're meeting. So our next work session is on subdivision, and it is November 29th, I believe.
Looks like.
Louis, do you know? Do you have it written down?
Because I think we've been doing the 4th Tuesday, but that falls on the week of Thanksgiving. So
It's a Tuesday after Thanksgiving?
Right, I thought, yeah, just like this, our first one last year. I think we decided then that we would do the 5th one.
All right.
Off the top of your head, does this week after Thanksgiving work better for everyone than the Tuesday of Thanksgiving?
Yes.
Imagine, okay.
Yeah, after 29th?
After's good.
Yeah, the 29th,
29th.
Yeah. Damn. Yeah.
Okay,
29th would be
excellent.
good.
All right, that's all I have. So just a couple more work sessions. We'll have the one in November, and then we'll do the whole ordinance. What we're planning to do is the whole ordinance at our work session in January, and then it picks up a different leg of the project. But with that, I will bid you a night.
Couple of editor comments, just general. I got confused going through landscaping and your definitions about caliper sizes. In landscaping, you talk about 6 inches above ground level versus 4 inches above ground level, and in definitions, you're talking about this, the standard measurement of DBH or diameter of breast height.
I will take a look at them.
I'm just saying it should be consistent.
Rebecca's going to write it down.
Usually when
I'll
it's
look at it.
0.5 above ground level, you're really talking about gallon containers, So I got confused about what we were trying to say with those.
We will make sure it's cleaned up. If it's not just you, it'll be someone else.
All right. So that is the end of our old business. On to any new business. Does anybody have any?
And I make one request of Lewis?
Yes.
Of course.
When, a month ago, whenever it was, when we had the applicant in about how to reuse the old Birchwood site, I thought I had some understanding of data centers, which was one of the options there, but I don't think I'm as smart on that topic as I thought I was. Is there any chance that you could get us some information on the pros and cons of data centers in a community?
Sure.
Articles written, maybe?
Well, whatever you can find on, concerns other municipalities, counties have experienced, and they're trying to correct. The comment that during the comment period that one person may have mentioned just reinforced something that I had already been talking to somebody about, but
Okay.
if you could find us
Do you
something.
know of any localities you're thinking about in particular? Okay. We'll figure it out.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll look into it and we'll try to get a presentation for the next meeting. Or
All right. Any other new business? Okay. Director's report. I don't believe we had one of those tonight, sir.
Nope, we will have one ready for you next time.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Lewis. Any other business?
New business, the citizen with the winery thing.
Yep.
He can go into business.
Right.
His wife almost answered the question for us. She wanted him to get it out of the house, and that is to go into a commercial establishment, and there's nothing preventing him from doing that. Well, who's drinking 200 gallons of wine and selling it, which he said he is? So he's talking about wanting to do it on a larger commercial basis. Let him go out and establish a business. He's just trying to avoid establishing a business. That's my perspective on it.
On the car thing, there is it's in my district, collector, where someone's got 40 cars in his yard. Up in the center. You know?
Yeah, I know who you're talking about. I think it's more than 40, actually. Yeah.
I don't want to be involved in individual cases, general policies, general rules.
They're only getting enforced if somebody complains and you're not even enforced.
Typically, yes, and that section of the ordinance does have that ambiguous language of it's exempt that any inoperable vehicle within a fully enclosed building or structure or otherwise shielded or screened from view. So that kind of takes all the teeth out of any sort of enforcement.
Yep.
We have yet to get to that section of the ordinance. Is that true?
Lewis, I would say if you would like to recommend that we change the language in that ordinance and offer us up a suggestion, I'd welcome hearing it.
Rather than going through an amendment, doing it now.
But I don't know if we've gotten to that yet, but that would certainly be something that we could include.
We already have, right? What in the use standards?
Okay.
We already have. I'll go back and look at it.
Okay.
In the morning, I'll try to remember when I wake up out of my days from tiredness.
Excitement, not tiredness.
I'll give you the section number with them, but we do have it in there.
Okay. It's written a little stronger than that?
I want to say it is,
Okay.
but that's what we can, if it's not, we'll revise it. But we do have something in there. But I don't remember if it was exactly what you had or if we strengthened it a little, so.
Yep.
All right. If there is no other business, I will ask for a motion to adjourn. That's got a motion's made. Motion's made, seconded, all in favor? All right. Thank you all. Have a great evening.